Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Economic Development meeting, March 13th, 2024, and we're going to start the meeting at 9:02 a.m. If I could do a roll call, please.
Yep.
For all those in attendance.
Yep. Mayor LaValle. Here. Councillor Collins. Present. Councillor Florent.
Here.
Councillor Kuyak. Here. Councillor Pijot.
Here.
Councillor Rodnick.
Here.
And Councillor Simon. Here. We can do, if I can get the names of everybody online as well, so I can make note of who attended.
Angela Pollock from the South Algonquin Business Alliance.
I have another one on there. Says Angela.
Yeah, sorry, that's my computer.
Okay, so you're okay twice. Okay,
I'm connected. I'm connected by audio on my phone and by video on my computer so that I can see the screen.
Okay, and then there's somebody else on there, Myrna Heimert.
Yes, hello. It's actually using Myrna's computer.
Oh,
It's Barney Bacon.
Excellent news, Barney. I'm going to tap out and I'll watch on the live stream then. Thank you.
I will be on as long as I can.
Oh, do you need to leave early?
Depends on the aircraft. No, I should be here for a while.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'd like to do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe people, specifically the Matatawa-Sirini people of the Madawaska River. We further acknowledge that the Algonquin people have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. And we strive to treat the land along with its flora and fauna it supports, the people, their customs, and traditions with honor and respect. Today, this area is home to people of all walks of life, and we acknowledge the shared opportunities and responsibilities to live, work, and survive within this beautiful territory. Shimigwich, all my relations. Are there any additions or amendments to the agenda? Not? Can I call for an adoption of the agenda? Can I ask for a mover? Seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, has anybody got a pecuniary interest to declare? See that there is none. Today is going to be an educational session. So I would like to let Brian Martin, our CAO, take over and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Pijot. I'll take a moment. Dr. David Robinson, I met him a couple of years ago in one of his Economic Development 101 courses through the University of Nipissing. Dr. David Robinson has taught economics at Laurentian University from 1987 till 2002. He's best known, however, for his over 150 columns focusing on Northern economic issues in Northern Ontario Business Magazine between 2003 and 2022. He's created and currently teaches two courses: Sustainable Northern Ontario Economic Development for Economic Development Officers, and has trained the more economic development officers in Northern Ontario than any other individual. He's also written two books, one on community forestry and several book chapters on Northern Ontario development. In addition, he initiated on Northern Ontario's MacEwan School of Architecture and was the first to promote the central role of mining supply and services sector in northeastern Ontario. He has consulted for various organizations, including forest-dependent communities, First Nation groups, and the Greater Sudbury Utilities. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Robinson.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm curious, are you looking at a large screen on the wall over there behind Brian? Is that the way it works?
Yes.
Okay, I hope that the slides are going to be large enough for you to read. But feel free to ask me to repeat anything or read any lines you can't get.
Tracy, I'm going to give him control.
So I would like to share this screen since I've prepared a set of slides for you. You'll be welcome to the slides if you want them later. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. How does that look to you? Can you see it?
Yep.
I can't make it larger from this end, so I hope it's readable. Okay, so this is all about you guys and what you guys want. Let's go back there. So I've got a little bit of structure to this. I'm going to talk about who we are. I'll talk about me and some of the things I know about you. I would love to know more about each of you, but unfortunately, I haven't had any time to talk to anyone except Ethel, who seems like, well, she seems like fun, actually. I kind of enjoyed that. And of course, Brian. I'll talk a little bit about what we want. And when I say what we want, I'll really be talking about what we mean by development. And I'm going to take a fair bit of time on that because that's essentially the necessary background. It's also, I have to say this, my obsession. Yeah, Brian's grinning there. When I went to Laurentian University in 1987, I was excited about doing economics about the local economy. I thought that was important. I'd come from a forestry fishing communities on the West Coast, and I thought, here's another resource region. I can do real economics about this. It turns out it's really hard because data was especially hard to get then. It was also a bit harder because my colleagues in the economics department really were not interested in Northern Ontario. So for much of the time I was at Laurentian, I was trying to get courses in economics that were directly related to Northern Ontario. And there was just never room on the curriculum because that wasn't real economics. I didn't agree, and I was probably obnoxious, but a few years into my time there, I got approached by people from Guelph, would you believe, to participate in their training programs for economic development officers in Northern Ontario. Now, what they do when they come up here, besides collecting a lot of money from EDOs and their councils, is they give them more or less the same training program they gave the people in Southern Ontario, little farming communities and bedroom communities all across Southern Ontario, except for one thing. They gave me an hour-and-a-half session to explain everything about Northern Ontario that was special. That you guys know that this doesn't make any sense. But anyway, for a couple of years, I did this, helping them draw money out of Northern Ontario while teaching Northern Ontario economic development people to think about Northern Ontario as if it were Southern Ontario. That's really what was happening. And I decided that we just had to have an economic development program for Northern Ontario. Well, a lot of years later, I found some friends and some money to start to develop that program. The university still wasn't keen, but we got the first course funded and developed, and then Laurentian ran into trouble. So we moved it over to the Northern Policy Institute, where it's currently housed. And since then, as Brian said, we've had a little over 120 economic development people from Northern Ontario go through the program. That probably makes me the leading economic development person in Northern Ontario, but I have to tell you, in fact, there isn't much of a plan for Northern Ontario. I now have 2 books and 2 courses, which total about 70 hours of instruction. And I can't get it all into this next little while that we have, unfortunately. I would love to. So we're going to skim through the material that I'm stuffing into this section. What do we want? Now, at that point, you probably know I'm going to talk too much. I will. I apologize. Let me say, it's really important that you slow me down, stop me, ask questions, or throw paper airplanes if that's a help. I used to tell my students to throw paper airplanes if I wasn't clear. It was very rare that any of them had the nerve to do that. So who should do this? Well, I guess Sean probably should, as in charge of the organization of the economic development program you have, since my guess is that nobody else is going to throw paper airplanes or do any interrupting. I need somebody to interrupt or speak to me fairly soon, or I'm going to feel like I'm talking to a wall.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, good.
There, you got some response.
I got some response. That's what I need. Okay. This line, what do we have to work with? Basically comes from some data and talking about your community. Okay, and the truth is you have access to most of this data. The trick is to make some sense of it. So I'll try and do that with part of the data I have on South Algonquin. And then I'd like to move into strategies. And this is a place where we really have to talk. Fundamentally, you guys are the smart ones. You have the ideas and you have the responsibility. So my talking at you doesn't do any good. So by the time we get to this 4th section, I'm really hoping you're going to be prepared to jump in. So let's go down to this first section. Who are we? Where are we? And so on. Well, I've told you a little bit about who I am. This probably gives you some answer to why on earth you'd want to put up with me. And you've heard this, so let's skip that. Who are you? And this is much more important. You're responsible for a lot of things. And the level that you're working at is the most important level of government. Most of the services are delivered locally. Yeah, the federal government, the provincial government control a lot of funds and they make a lot of rules.
Sure.
But when it comes to the immediate lives of people in your communities, if anybody has any control of it, you guys do. Okay, so that's not just my opinion or flattery. The conventional view and all the textbooks on Canadian government and regional government say you guys are the most important level of government. They also say something else I'd like to call to your attention, and that is in the Canadian system, you have very limited power. So put those two together and you're going to get lots of blame for things you can't do, including around economic development, I have to say. You need to be clever and navigate that as well as you can. Excuse me, my throat seems to be, it actually feels like a frog. Hang on.
So this is why you are here, Dr. Robinson, is to help us navigate this.
Well, I hope I can. I hope I can. It's
because in municipal politics, we are the visible, we are the ones that are touchable, and we are the first people that people reach out to. So getting back to your first statement or your second statement about limited power and limited money, and this is where you come in, where you're gonna navigate us through or try to educate us how to navigate us through this.
Yes. I think you said that pretty well. I think the simple story is you get the blame and often you don't get the credit. And that's nothing new. That's true across every municipal government I've seen in Northern Ontario. Sometimes it's actually quite nasty. Lots of times it's just a lot of mumbling. And it's a challenge. And there are background reasons for this, I have to say, that have to do with the way the municipal system evolved. Goes right back to Confederation. In Confederation, we had a bunch of little tiny colonies. And they got together and each of them had a British colonial government. So they were literally colonies. And they decided they'd make themselves into one federal system. What you notice in that is it wasn't local governments that had anything to do with it. It was the central ex-colonial regime in each of those areas. So Upper Canada was basically what we call Southern Ontario, and it had a couple of decent-sized towns. Okay, well, we have cities now that are 100 times the size of anything in that original confederation. But they still have whatever powers those provincial governments wanted to hand on to them, which wasn't an awful lot. Canada's system is unusual, alas, because it's actually one of the most centralized in the world. Even in the States, municipalities have more powers. Many cities have their own income taxes. They can set their own commodity taxes. They can set gasoline taxes if they want. They have hotel taxes and so on. None of that's in your control. You have one instrument for raising revenue that's in your control, really, and that's the property tax. Right? It doesn't feed back into economic activity. So if you increase the economic activity in your community, does the money come back to you? Well, no. I see somebody shaking his head. I'm sorry, I don't have your names on the screen all the time. I'm just going to do here. That was Bill that was shaking his head when I said, did the money come back to you? And absolutely right, Bill, it doesn't come back to you. It goes to the province, it goes to the federal government in income taxes. All of your success makes them richer. Yeah, that is actually a fundamental and serious problem in the Canadian system. You don't have the control of the things that you're actually responsible for. So let's talk a little bit more about you, not as an institution, but as people. You're the elected representatives for a community that in 2021, the census said had 1,150 people. You get somewhat different numbers from different sources. What we can say about that number is that it's mostly been declining, although there was a little bit of an uptick, according to the labor force survey data. You're all baby boomers like me. I'm guessing there isn't anybody here born after 1965. Is anyone? Fifth?
Right.
Yes. Pardon? Oh, yeah. And you, Sean? Really?
Yeah, no apology required. It's all good.
Okay, that's significant too. My experience with councils is you guys are smart. You're smart and committed. You want to make a difference. That's one of the big frustrations because it's harder than you imagined before you got elected or dragooned into the job. And very few people actually appreciate what you do. Okay, that's probably means you're a bit frustrated with some of these challenges. You're not economists or development specialists. And it's a difficult field, actually, mostly misunderstood. And you're probably more people than data people like I am. I mean, I love to do arithmetic and mathematics and look at numbers and try to figure out what they tell me. Part of my job as an instructor is to help people see what the data tells them. Okay, so is that a fair description of where you guys are? Anybody want to add anything? Ethel, do you think that's fair? No?
They all nodded their head yes.
Okay. Then we can probably proceed without too much more worrying on my part. It's important you understand that I have some appreciation of your situation and recognize the challenge in accomplishing what the kinds of things I think people want of you and you'd like to be able to do. The truth is it's just going to be hard. So,
Dr. Davidson, it's Ethel Valley.
sorry, yeah?
If I may, I just would like to add, and that's a really good description of who we are, and you may have it somewhere else in your presentation, but I think it's important to put in print that South Algonquin is quite unique. And I feel that it has got to be said that one of the most frustrating parts of being in South Algonquin is the whole issue of where Algonquin Park sits, plus we have 80% almost of Crown land and 20% of municipal land or land in our township. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. So if I may just add that to the mix, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was actually on my list to mention a bit later, but it is really important. So let's see if I can get to my next page. And this is where we start to talk about where we are. I've been teaching and working in Northern Ontario, 35 years plus. And one of the things that has been a lot of work to explain to people from outside the region, and even sometimes to council members and economic development officers, is just how different the region is from Southern Ontario. The geology is different. We're on the Shield. South Algonquin's on the Shield. The biology is different. Boreal forests. The climate is somewhat different. And it's interesting because climate is now changing faster in Northern Ontario than Southern Ontario. It's an extraction economy. Southern Ontario is not an extraction economy. It's a high-powered industrial system, very, very much like the Asian giants like Singapore and Hong Kong. It's about the same size, comparable in size, in area, and in economic power. It's one of the richest regions in the world. Northern Ontario is not part of that. I'm sorry, somebody said something and I couldn't hear it.
Oh, I apologize. It wasn't loud enough. I said, yeah, we are far from being an Asian power for sure.
That's right. But it is important to think about who you're connected to. The Asian tigers are powerhouses. In Southern Ontario, you have something equivalent to one of those Asian tigers. it's on a piece of land that spears south into the biggest and most powerful market in the world. Southern Ontario is actually amazing. It's a bit of a mystery why they've never put a railroad, high-speed railroad, all the way from Quebec City down to Windsor to take advantage of it. It's just economic incompetence. But I mean, every other region like this has high-speed rail now. The only one that doesn't is this magical place in Southern Ontario. Now, why does this raving about Southern Ontario matter to you? Well, because mainly it means that the government in Queen's Park doesn't have much sense of what's going on for you guys, for Northern Ontario. They keep thinking the North is like the South. They don't know the history. They don't understand what the low densities mean. They don't understand what a static older population means. And that describes Northern Ontario from about 1975, static, slightly declining population. Of course, and Ethel, here's where I come back to your point. South Algonquin is not like Southern Ontario, but it's not like Northern Ontario either. It's an organized territory. Most of the territory in Northern Ontario is not organized. That's a big difference. It's isolated from the north. You've got this solid cap on top of you called Algonquin Park, which means that you can't really get to Northern Ontario very easily. You're isolated from the south. It's 3 hours to Toronto and 2 hours to Ottawa. You have large rural areas to either side of you and to the south. And each of those areas is just a little bit denser and more developed than you are. You're a remote community. I'm sure that at Queen's Park, they don't talk about South Algonquin as a remote community. But if you look at the transportation situation, you look at the time, you look at the economic situation, you're actually a remote community. Now, you're not a fly-in community like some of them in Northern Ontario, but that's an important piece to understand. You don't have great agricultural land like some of the South, which is some of the most terrific agricultural land in the world, actually. You don't have mining like most of Northern Ontario. You don't even have a static population. You have a still declining population. Sorry, couldn't hear that.
Yeah, we totally agree with that last statement.
I take umbrage, it's Councillor Florent here. I take umbrage with your statement that about Northern Ontario being unorganized. I've been part of an unincorporated community all of my life except for the last 25 years. And I haven't moved. It's just, this corporation is only 25 years old. There's nothing unorganized about the unincorporated. They are unincorporated. I'm in agreement with that, but they are not organized. I was part of a local service board. I was part of a local roads board. They were quite organized.
You're right. It's a little more complicated than I'm saying, for sure. I can't argue with that. You're absolutely right, Joe. Ethel's point, though, that 80% of your land is Crown land, you don't control it.
That's correct.
Is characteristic of Northern Ontario. More than 80% across the rest of Northern Ontario is Crown land, completely outside the jurisdiction of the municipalities. And if you look at a map, what you see is a lot of little, you see little townships and little areas that are handed over to local councils for a few local responsibilities, but they actually generally have less influence than the municipalities, the organized areas of Southern Ontario. Southern Ontario is completely solidly assigned. Northern Ontario, a bunch of speckles across a huge area of organized territories. you're pointing to a more complicated case, and I appreciate that because you are special. I mean, I could say weird, but if it's okay, I'll just stick with special, Joe.
Were you specifically speaking of Councillor Florin? Just checking.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Were you specifically speaking of Councillor Florin being special or the township?
Can I ask you for advice on that point?
We all know the real answer.
Look, you're all crazy or you wouldn't be sitting on council. It's a difficult job, and I'm sure you didn't realize how frustrating it would be. And I admire the kinds of commitment it takes, but it's probably fair to say you're all crazy, not just Joe.
Thank you.
And Bill nodded very enthusiastically. Okay. You have a declining population. You have an older population than Northern Ontario. Northern Ontario, I keep telling people your population is older. Finally, people have started to take seriously that Northern Ontario is aging out faster than Southern Ontario. And that's not surprising. There's an interesting history here. Northern Ontario was once the immigrant frontier. People poured into Northern Ontario. And so you had Poles and Germans and Finns and Norwegians and all sorts of people pouring into an area that had a pretty significant Aboriginal population. It was very different from Southern Ontario. And you've probably heard phrases like old Ontario, stayed old, boring Toronto. Population of people who were second and third generation mostly, because so much of the immigration flowed into the north. That's not true anymore. Since about the 70s, that flow, well, for South Algonquin, that flow actually slowed down earlier because of the limitations of the forestry industry and agriculture. Agriculture went into decline before the 70s, but that flow slowed down for Northern Ontario in the 70s. And that makes a really interesting situation because the flow to Southern Ontario accelerated. And that means right now, Toronto, they say, is half first generation Canadians, half. If you look at South Algonquin, it's easily a majority third generation. This is old Canada. You guys are representing old Canada, not new Canada. And that's interesting. I mean, that means your situation is different. Across the North, programs for getting new immigrants to settle in the North are taking off. They're getting a lot of enthusiasm from communities that are losing people. And when I walk out in my streets, I've got neighbors now that are from Iran. I've got neighbors that are from Turkey. And this is Northern Ontario City. I'm in Sudbury. We've got kids from hundreds and hundreds of kids from India going to the university and settling down and getting homes in Northern Ontario. As far as I can see, that's not happening in South Algonquin yet. You're left out of this slowly growing, still trickle of new immigrants into Northern Ontario. So you're between the really hot spot in the south and a place that's starting to warm up farther to the north, but you're not getting that flow yet. And that's kind of significant. So let's go on. Anybody want to add more ways that your community is different? I've got a lot to learn. Remember, I haven't had years of thinking about this. I've been trying to catch up with you in a sense.
kind of thinking, Dr. Robinson, getting to the older generation. There are a lot of people, and myself, I am one. I'm third generation to be living on the property that I live on. When my grandson comes to visit, he's the fifth generation to sleep inside the house that my grandfather built. There's a lot of that in this area. There's a lot of pride in this area as well too. But economics is a big factor why our children are moving away from here.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a great story, Sean. I mean, to have 5 generations on a piece of property is pretty astonishing, even in Canada, that's one of the oldest democracies in the world. Right? It's quite astonishing. It's even more unusual when you're classed as Northern Ontario. You're not Northern Ontario. That's just an absurdity of our classification system. You're probably just the most remote part of rural Southern Ontario, which still makes you special.
Disagree.
Pardon?
I disagree wholeheartedly. We are definitely northern.
Okay.
I've worked in the 1970s, I worked all over Ontario, like from border to border to border. We are Northern Ontario. No doubt in my mind at all.
Well, you're classified that way. I don't get to make the decision about this, and you probably don't either. I think it's just important to keep in mind the big differences. Yes, you're part of the strip up Eastern Ontario that includes Algonquin Park. You're a long way from other Northern Ontario communities, which is one reason why I think it's important to remember. Culturally, in lots of ways, you're Northern Ontario for sure. I couldn't argue with that. Don't want to argue with that, Joe. I do appreciate the argument, by the way, because almost everything I say has more nuance than I'm putting into it. Let's keep those two views. You're firmly Northern Ontario, and there's lots of reasons for thinking there's a big difference that has to be taken into account. Is that fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. So what's next? Well, looking at your website, one of the websites, I thought it was interesting the way you present yourself to the public. Maybe you're not all committed to this particular statement. It says where you are. That is, the most important feature is Algonquin Park, and you offer abundance of 4 seasons wilderness experiences. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually accurate locationally from at least some perspectives, and it's true in terms of having lots of 4 seasons wilderness experiences. The question I'd put to you, is that how you want to be seen? Is that going to deal with the development challenge that you have? Because this really says that you're going to continue to rely on essentially recreational use of your area in Algonquin Park. The lakes, the rivers. You're going to sell property to rich people in the South who want to retire here or who want a resort cottage. I think that's what that says. Now, I don't think it's false. I think it's good advertising in lots of ways. Is that the way you want to see yourself, though? Is that where your focus is?
I think that is the biggest part of our township, is because geographically where we are located, and the people that come to visit here. So you know what, I'd like to easily and safely bet that 80% of our economy flourishes around tourism.
I think that's true. I mean, that's certainly the the mills and the logging and make up a big chunk of the economy. After that, it's tourism, accommodation. It's absolutely true. And, and again, I'm not arguing about the facts. I'm just observing that this acknowledging the facts as they are on the ground might be limiting the vision you have for development. Okay. Now, maybe it's all there is.
I think with that statement, Dr. Robinson, I think if we just hypothetically, if we had 100 visitors here, I think the township is kind of hoping that out of the 100 people that come to visit this area will want to put up roots in this area, in our township, and possibly start a business. But that's all a hope out of the 100 people.
Okay, I think that's actually a terrific place to start thinking about strategy. So I'm going to take a minute to support that observation, and then I'm going to postpone it to later and hope that you'll bring it back. Okay, Sean? What I want to say about this is you did two things there that I think are terrific for economic planning. First of all, you put a number on the table, 100 visitors. Okay, I'm not sure how many visitors you have. I couldn't find that kind of record anywhere, but pick a number and say you want 100 more this month. That's a goal now. And the second thing you said that I think is really important is you talked about conversion. You get 100 more visitors. How do you do that? How do you get 20 more of them to seriously think about coming here to retire or to raise their kids? Right? That's another question. But you put the two together, and I think that's exactly the right way to think about it. Target, numerical target, conversion strategy to make it better. Okay, so you guys, I'm not trying to flatter Sean here. I just wanted to take advantage of the fact that he put out what I think is a really valuable way of thinking. And when we're done, I'm going to have listed a bunch of sort of general areas that you could target.
I have an observation I'd love to share. So if you're looking back in the 1970s, when this town was probably just the town of Whitney itself, because we weren't amalgamated at the time, it was probably around 1,200, 1,500 people. The place was busy, high tourism. We didn't have any other industry other than the mill and the forestry, the MNR for the park. So over the last, 40 years now, we've seen a general decline, but yet the mills and the park is still there. So what has happened? There hasn't been growth in 40 years. So when we're looking at the statement that you have up there right now, it's like we're still relying on that tourism to support us, because for some reason something has happened, and I don't know what it was or is, but if it was the flux of our youth at the time, but certainly something has happened. And over the last probably 5 years, a big portion of what I have seen is that are not retirees, but people buying up the small little houses and making them their cottage. We are becoming a cottage town, or area now, we're with our amalgamation, but something has happened. And like I said, we haven't had any growth in business. We haven't lost any business. Maybe we've lost a grocery store here or there, but in general, every business that was open and operating in the 70s are still open and operating. So it's mind boggling to think that we can't, we can't sustain ourselves and we can't move forward because we sort of don't have a good grasp on what has happened. We don't have the land to bring in industry. So yes, we're sort of stuck, which I guess is why we consider ourselves Northern. I don't know. But anyways, there's my observation.
Right. You're Joan, I think. Is that right?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, those are good points. And I mean, it's helpful to observe this transformation. You're becoming Muskoka Northeast, sort of, when you talk about becoming cottage country, and you've seen what's happening in Muskoka. It's just filling right up, eh? You could try to figure out how long it would take that wave to reach you till you got that kind of spillover from Toronto or Ottawa. But there's a lot of empty land between you and the edges of the Muskoka region that are going to fill up first. All of those communities between you and Toronto are in line for catching more of that before you do.
Right.
Okay, so that's just the reality. When I say you're remote, there are sort of several sources of development. One of them is the spillover from Toronto. And I've emphasized that Toronto is one of the great cities of the world now. Believe it or not, those of us who are third and fourth generation or more Canadians think of Toronto as a boring little cow town almost. Muddy York, all that kind of stuff. No, it's one of the big cities in the world. And that means that the spillover from Toronto is one of the biggest pieces of news for everybody. Now, when I'm advising tourism operations in the rest of Northern Ontario, Joe, you win, the rest of Northern Ontario. I point out that that's really significant. The market for tourism is Toronto, right? That's the biggest pool. And there's a thing called the gravity model that the geographers use. And what you do is you take the populations in two places and multiply those together, and then you divide by the square of the distance. Okay, so what makes a market for you guys? Anything that's got a really big population that isn't too far away. Well, you basically, for you, described the Ottawa region and Toronto, big chunk of Southern Ontario. And what kind of target is there down there now? This is an interesting question. And let me put it up for you to think about. If half of Toronto is now new Canadians, they don't have in their minds canoeing in Algonquin Park. They don't really know who Tom Thompson was. They don't have, even in their minds, the images of spending a week or 2 weeks in the summer in a cottage. All of these things are sort of old Canada images. It means that this huge and growing market has its mind drifting away from the kind of tourism that Joan was just talking about. And if there's a market, the market is probably a new one. I tell people in the rest of Northern Ontario, Joe, that what you've got to sell now is probably, if you haven't spent a week by a lake or in the woods being eaten by mosquitoes in Northern Ontario, you're not a Canadian. Because that's part of our mythology, isn't it? Right? Sandra, don't you think so?
Can I interject a little bit? It's Sandra Collins here. I used to own a holiday resort. You can hear from my accent. I am a new Canadian. I've been here since 2007 from England, but I owned a holiday resort. And initially, people would come and just be very happy just to be in the cottage, as you say, go out canoeing, swim in the river, and go for a walk in the park. But we noticed more in the latter years. We sold back in 2017, but they wanted us to organize things for us. The people coming wanted a day by day instructed tour, if you like. They wanted their food brought in. They didn't want to go grocery shopping. They wanted a day by day. Okay, today you go cycling, you pick up the bike here, you go here. Tomorrow you've got a canoe ride and there's a packed lunch. And they wanted more organized type activity. They weren't content just to enjoy what we were offering. And we'd seen that transition happen really quite rapidly. And when we looked at it, it was the newer Canadians that wanted this more organized approach. That, well, haven't you got zip lining, or haven't you got tubing, or haven't you got this, haven't you got that? They weren't happy with the things that the other people earlier on when we bought the place were happy doing. So I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. The attraction and the tourism that used to come here now has to change. We have to offer them more. And I think that's a really, really important issue. We need to get them here as well. We have no transport, and a lot of new Canadians are not purchasing vehicles. We have no way of getting them here, and once they're here, we have no way of moving them around. So we are very, very constrained and very, very cut off from Toronto. So I think that's another big issue as well. That's my two pennyworth, Dr. Robinson.
That's terrific. And you both supported and contradicted me, which is perfect. Yeah, that is the trend. When people who are working in the cities now, look for a holiday, they want all-included drinks. I just throw that in, but they want intense activity because they're taking a 1 week off and then they're going back to work in the city. And that's what's being advertised. That's the tourism industry. And this is not our Ontario tourism industry. This is the global tourism industry, the American tourism industry, the Caribbean tourism industry, Singapore's, they're all saying, come and we will give you everything. Lots and lots of intense experience. Don't bring a book. The comparison I'd like to make is, if you think about one of these cruise ships, the big cruise ships now have something like 2,000 cabins in them. You don't have 2,000 cabins in South Algonquin, right? And they go out for a week or two. And the kind of organized activity you're talking about is available, as well as a great deal of diversity. And they're sucking up a huge amount of the tourism dollar. Right? That's the competition. What you probably have, and what you had, I think, was a small operation with not a lot of economies of scale, and none of the economies of scale in advertising. Advertising, I mean, even the movies, the action movies are all full of these foreign locations that are very exciting and and so on, all the way from James Bond on. That's what people see. That's what they think they want. That's a challenge. So I raised the question with this slide. What have you got to market? And what we have is this has been the reality. The market is changing. Maybe it is the reality for the future. Okay, somebody's speaking and I can't hear or see who it is.
It's outside.
It's outside of here, yeah.
Oh, it's none of you.
No.
Nobody important. Great.
It's Ethel. It's Ethel.
Oh, it was you saying something? I'm
No,
sorry.
I just started to say something, if I may. I just want to add something to the mix here. I just want to go on record, and I agree with Councillor Florent. I never tell anyone where I'm meeting that I'm from Southern Ontario. I talk about Northern Ontario and all the benefits of Northern Ontario status. But I think I want to add to the mix here is whenever if I'm in Toronto and somebody asks where I live and I say Whitney, they look at me like I have 3 heads. But I say from Madawaska, where is that? But if you say you're next to Algonquin Park, their heads go up and they listen.
Yes.
I really believe that South Algonquin, no matter where we are, what we say, has to talk about Algonquin Provincial Park, because you have the data, David, I don't, but yeah, I would suggest that 70% of our people that come into Algonquin Park, or even more, are visiting Whitney because they're adjacent to Algonquin Park, or they want to come out, get gas or some groceries or something. So having said that, I want to jump into the situation I feel in South Algonquin, and one that in terms of economic development we have to look at. And that's the whole issue of houses that come available, and the very few that do in South Algonquin are being bought up by people that have no interest in being part of this community or our communities, and are renting these places out at exorbitant rates. They're getting the money, and South Algonquin isn't any better for it. So that's an issue that I hope somewhere today we will be able to discuss and talk about what we can do to kind of look at that whole situation. Is it a tax? What is it? So I just wanted to be very clear and add that to what we might be talking about, Dr. Robinson. Thank you.
I think that's a great point. I mean, how do you convert the flow that comes to the park to revenue, jobs, and opportunities locally? I think that's really important. It's kind of hard. I don't know whether you can tax the B&B kind of stuff. You ought to be able to, but as I pointed out, councils don't have the power to set their own taxes on things. You have permission to tax hotels under the provincial government's relatively recent changes. I think that's an argument. There is an argument there.
And just one last thing, and then I'll be quiet, just to go back to Council Pishaw's point. I mean, I think that's really good about the 4 or 5 generations. It's my hope that we can get a system going where we can get our own youth and our own people back into our communities. Because right now, we don't have the jobs and we don't have any of the development to do that. Plus, we don't have any housing to be able to bring them back. But to young people that I talk to, they'd love to come back home. But right now, there's no opportunity for them to come.
Okay, you jumped some points that I have a little bit later. Thank you. You totally destroyed my presentation now, Ethel.
So sorry, no, that was not my intent.
No, that's great. I mean, ideally, we want to be having a conversation. We want, I mean, who's going to have to work their way through this? Not me. I'm a carpetbagger, right? You guys need to get together the kinds of knowledge you have. Sandra's information is terrific. Your observation, Joe, you understand your situation. How do you get it into a plan? I think bringing people back is part of the strategy. It has to be. I think making young people want to stay is part of the strategy, and that's part of making it attractive to young families. Right? One of the things that has made Northern Ontarians most unhappy, it's gone under a couple of names, brain drain, all our brightest leave. And my kids have left. Maybe I'm going to have to retire in the South. I hear that all the time, right across Northern Ontario. And Joe, you're part of Northern Ontario in that sense. Ethel, you're right. What's the reference point for all of us? Well, it's Southern Ontario, which makes us Northern Ontario, and you can't get around that. That's the way we're seen. That's the directional structure of Ontario. You know, there are two axes. The power axis runs, I guess, southwest, northeast. And the other axis goes north a little bit, and then it goes basically northwest. Right? And the farther away you go up that other axis, the more you're Northern Ontario and the less you're Southern Ontario. Well, the mass of population is to the south, so you're Northern Ontario, and you can't get around that. That's why people in Parry Sound call themselves Northern Ontario when they really look like Muskoka now, right? They still have history, by the way. I thought I heard.
Where north starts, Northern Ontario.
I didn't hear that. It's very echoey.
There's always been a debate where the north starts once you get, yeah, right? Is it Bracebridge or is it North Bay or, you know, so.
Yeah.
That's been.
There's enough differences north of the French River that I think that that's a genuine economic boundary, but it's not complete. The way you see yourselves, the way other people see you, the fact that regions that were once really clearly north and forestry, harvesting regions with a certain amount of tourism are now being drawn into the sort of suburban, as Sandra said, people come and want everything organized for them. It's like a hotel. I mean, there's a change, cultural change going on. Getting your minds around it is part of coming up with a good tourism strategy. It's also part of coming up with a good strategy for population growth, if that's possible. So let's go on. I've been babbling for an hour now. Do people want a 5-minute break or something? Would you like to? We could break a couple of times. I always need to go get a coffee and stretch after a while. And I usually do it on a kind of hour cycle with my 3-hour night classes. What would you like? I'm happy to go on for another half hour. I've got endless stuff. I think Joe is looking like he's ready for some more. Give me some guidance.
Dr. Robinson.
Yes.
Keep going.
Keep going. Okay.
We're good if you're good.
Okay, so we're still talking about who we are. What's your problem? Well, this is one way of describing it, and this has come out of talking with economic development people across the north. And it's centered on the local economy. So we worry about jobs. I'm going to go backwards around this circle, counterclockwise from the top. We want jobs. Companies say, but you don't have people. But you don't have people because you don't have housing. if you do get the jobs, you get the residents, you get the taxes, so your community has revenue, you can improve the services, which supports and even attracts the workforce. So there's a cycle there, but there's this gap, and it's housing. Now there's a bit of a complication there because a lot of residents are getting money not from work, but from pensions, Social Security, unemployment insurance, gifts, and so on, investment returns. But but the basic logic of a local economy is jobs, residents, revenue for the municipality to provide the services they need, the essential role of the municipal government, which then supports the workforce and the jobs. It's broken. It's broken because you can't recruit for jobs if there's no housing. Okay? So we can break this picture up in different ways and intervene at different points. But I've found it, well, let me put it differently. The economic development classes where this developed have found this a useful way of thinking about the challenges that they face at the municipal level. They only get the revenue if they have the residents. And that means they're economically constrained by something that actually isn't under their control, that housing sector. And people think it is, the federal government right now is leaning on municipalities across Canada to change their zoning. Change your zoning so that you can have more density, so you can accommodate all these people. But it's not quite that simple. You change your zoning and somebody still has to find money to build housing, right? They still have to find land. Ethel pointed out that you don't have land. You've only got 20% of the region's land under your control. And you don't have extensive sewer systems that people can just plug into. So the kinds of lots that you need, and I looked a bit at your planning code, your planning documents. There's real restrictions on where people can build, and they have to deal with their wastewater and all of that. Since there's no sewerage, they have to have septic systems and so on, which means they have to have lots of a certain size. And that really is a restriction on housing, right? It's very hard to get, for instance, high density housing for seniors close to the center of Whitney, which the federal government would like you to do. Do you have the infrastructure to support it? I don't think you have you?
No, we don't.
No. Okay, so you're under pressure and expected to solve this housing problem. You don't have land. Your legislation doesn't actually let you do anything anyway. And if you did something about the land problem, somebody would still have to invest in the housing, hoping that people would come and settle and pay for the housing. And who's willing to pay for the housing? Well, it's already been pointed out that the people who are coming to South Algonquin to buy housing really want lakeshore recreational property. They're not interested in settling down for jobs anyway. That's where the money is. If you were a developer with a piece of land, what market would you target? Outsiders who come in part-time, possibly retirement people with a fair bit of money, who don't contribute much to the economy and aren't going to be interacting very much with the rest of you. Now, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but that seems to me to be where you are. I'm expecting Joe to tell me why I'm wrong. That's your role, isn't it, Joe? You take that one on especially? I should have. Is that
Well, I
Joe?
usually do, but you're spot on.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson, I'm a contractor, in this area. And this is what I've been seeing for probably about the last 15 years. Where people are buying a cottage and turning the cottage into a home and retire.
Right.
So that cycle has been happening for the last 15 years. So I've been doing this long enough that I've seen the cycles kind of take sort of a reverse turn as well too, because now the people no longer can sustain themselves here because of age and health. So now there are these very big expensive portions of property that have been up for sale. Now, just to throw in a pandemic into the curveball here, now that changed everything. Very, very largely up here as well too, where people wanted to escape from the city. They did not want to be confined to their condominiums in the city. They wanted to have a place if ever there was to be another pandemic happen. They bought up large portions of property up here.
Yep. Now they've gone back to their jobs down south.
And very rarely come back here. I know of a few properties that sold up here where they did some minor renovations to make it habitable and have only come to visit maybe a handful of times a year.
Yep. Yep. There's cottages all across Northern Ontario like that, but you're in the zone where it's going to be happening more and more. Right? Okay.
Well, the next generation doesn't seem to want those properties either, so they do come up for sale.
Yeah. I mean, I guess part of what you're pointing to is one of your markets is turnover of retirement homes and cottages. And people who have them, I've heard now, are increasingly doing B&B kinds of uses, which gets them often a decent revenue on a property, which means these properties are now revenue properties. Maybe the trick is for you guys to buy properties and make money off them. I mean, I know that's not conventional for municipalities, but boy, oh boy, that would be a revenue generator. Right? Sandra has trouble competing with that part of the market, or she had trouble, I imagine. And I think regular hotels and motels are having more and more trouble with these sort of brief rental arrangements. Anyway. Okay, so you've got a virtuous circle or you've got a broken circle. And I think one thing I really want to emphasize is that the circle is your municipality and its revenue and its responsibilities for the services to support the economy. But housing has never been a municipal responsibility, especially in Northern Ontario. Although from the late 60s till about 1990, there was a big push for public housing in larger towns, and a lot of municipalities participated in that process, encouraged cooperatives. And then about 1990, Canadian government dumped that responsibility on the provinces dumped it on the municipalities, and there's been no public housing built basically since. So some of the shortages that we're talking about in the housing market go back to policies of both conservatives and liberals back in 1990. Just took 30 years to mature as a problem. Okay, I like this graph because I made it, but did I? Yeah. So what do we want to do? We'd like to help you find some ways to promote sustainable development in South Algonquin. I need to do a little bit of work, I think, to help you understand what I mean by sustainable development. We're in the process of trying to get some of the opportunities and the challenges onto the table. The best we can do, oh, I see a typo. No, I see a spelling mistake. The best we can do is leave you kind of cautiously optimistic and kind of energized to follow a few of the ideas in the short run. There's not a cure. I do want to talk a little bit about the role of the economic development officer in all of this. So, and just to mention, sorry, I'm just the order. I thought I had a different order here for a second. I've drawn on quite a few sources, including my textbooks and your comprehensive zoning bylaw and older and newer accounts of the community, census material from the Northern Policy Institute. I'd like to put in a bit of a plug for the Northern Policy Institute as an organization that provides data. Do you guys know what it is? Have you had any contact with the NPI?
No, have not. I have not.
Okay, let me just toss some information at you about this. We had not had a think tank that tries to figure out what Northern Ontario needs until about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. It was something I and a lot of people talked about, but finally the provincial government put something like $5 million into a fund for a think tank. And that think tank's purpose is to provide municipalities in Northern Ontario with information that will help them with solving whatever problems they have, whether it's immigration, planning kinds of problems, help them understand how the economy is evolving and so on. And so the Northern Policy Institute has a number of, how to say this, among other things, data assistance programs going. You can call them and say, what can you tell me about this? And if it's not too much work, they'll give you a free data report on it. Now, if you want more than that, you have to join their data consortium. They've bought all the special sources of information that you probably can't afford to buy at your level, and they let you use it, give you access to it. They also have collaborations among municipalities for doing certain projects. And these are research projects that you might need. And what else do? They have a website, they have online a statistics summary for all the communities in Northern Ontario. That basically draws on what's in StatsCan, but it's selected. I would generally go to StatsCan for data. I don't know if you've ever looked at their community profiles from the census. There's about 3,000 lines in essentially a spreadsheet format. One line for how many people there are between 0 and 5 years of age. Another line for how many people speak Cree of this version, how many people speak a dialect that's known only in Pakistan, a huge amount of information. One of the things I learned from that is South Algonquin has an unusually high percentage of people of Polish descent. You guys know that? Anybody here of Polish descent? I see Joan nodding. Is that right? Are you of
No,
Polish?
I agree with that, yes. The area around us is very high Polish.
High is not a huge percent really, but it's higher than most places. That's the
Yeah.
kind of interesting and odd detail that you can pick up if you want to drag your eyes down these rows and rows and rows of figures. Which is part of what I did, by the way. But anyway, there's all this data out there. You can get real help from the Northern Policy Institute. So before we go any farther, let's talk a little bit about Brian. You there, Brian, still? Wake him up, someone.
He's there.
You're the star.
Okay, yeah, he's a star. I know him as an economic development officer. He's your CEO right now. Uh, I think that means you don't really have an economic development officer position at the moment. I didn't check that with him. But he does work as an economic development officer and really does understand that role. I've been impressed by his understanding of South Algonquin and the problem of development, the kinds of information he connects. But the role of this particular position in communities is, I've drawn it as star. This is the preferred representation of the economic development officers I've taught. They prefer it represented as a star. I've suggested an octopus, but they like the star image. Somebody does the job of making connections for council or for the development committee of council. And that means making sure the data is available, because typically your economic development committee doesn't dig into the data. That doesn't necessarily mean doing the digging, but sometimes it does. It might mean going to the NPI or getting someone in to talk about the data. Somebody needs to keep track of what other development organizations, the various funding organizations that might give you money for projects and so on in the development area. Somebody's got to know what it is that the business community needs. For instance, we know that how do we know this? Well, I know this because Brian told me. The mills are really worrying about not having workers. That's a business problem that falls into your lap to some extent. That's got to be taken into account when you think about housing, when you think about, is it possible that the mills can help you with land or with a housing project? Good question. Who's supposed to think about that? Well, all of you, but keeping it together in a kind of structure is your economic development officer's job. Or I guess what we're doing now is we're pushing all this off onto Sean. Is that right? Sean's got, yeah, Sean's problem. Okay, let's take I could just revise this on the fly, but it would waste us a bit of time. I'm going to put Sean in there for you. You just imagine Sean's in there, but Brian's still helping. Somebody's got to keep track of what council members are hearing from citizens and what they hear themselves, and pull this all together and do the coordinating, the agenda setting, making sure there's documents, making sure people understand how all these pieces might go together. You all do it. You all do it. You all think about it. It's council's job in a sense, but the way council does it is it sticks a person in there to do that. In most communities, that's an economic development officer. The Municipal Act lets you hire an economic development officer, but it doesn't necessarily give you much money for that. Some of the communities in Northern Ontario are using 2-year student positions for their economic development officer, which tells you they're having real trouble. A small community like yours has a real problem with the revenue you need, unless you can get some outside money for it. But the role of connecting with all of these pieces and getting it on the table in a coherent form is generally your EDO's problem. And then once you make a decision, it's often the EDO's job to go make the applications for money, to bring together the business people. We've got some business people here. Barney, that's you, right? I can't see Barney.
Oh, I'm a retired guy.
You're not. I thought you were representing.
I am a member of the Economic Committee along with Sean. He puts up with me.
Ah, right. But I thought you were also here as part of the Business Alliance group. Is that right?
Yes, that part's true.
So it's a really good thing you're here because that kind of coordination is central. If we go back to that picture where we had housing, who's responsible for housing, producing housing? That's your local business sector, a part of your business sector that produces housing, which means your economic development officer or committee pretty much has to coordinate with that part of the business sector. Now, you got a nice little advantage here because apparently your person you've put in charge of it is also is also a contractor. Is that right, Sean? That's what you said?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Sean and Barney have got to solve this for you, I guess.
That's why we're listening to you, and hopefully we come up with a good strategy to carry on.
Well, a piece of the strategy really is this coordinating. It's understanding that your role isn't so much to do things as to coordinate, to help the business, the citizens get what they want. Right? You have certain responsibility, roads, regulations. You aren't responsible for schools, although they're an essential part of the community. Community centers you have to fund. You have really, in many ways, limited responsibilities, but you're asked to think about the big picture and steer the boat, even though you don't hold the rudder most of the time. Obviously, if Barney's retired, he's not going to take the tiller and steer you through the housing problem either. But that's,
Well, don't count on that one.
yeah, okay. Well, let's get somebody who can really do something, Barney. Who in the organization should we be talking to about the housing problem for businesses?
Well, that's a point of discussion because Sean is the chair of the committee. And you are pointing out that we may need more help on the committee of good skills to create a good strategy and plans to carry on with this effort.
Yeah, I mean, basically, your alliance needs to sit down and say, what do we want? And then to talk with Sean and his committee at length, I think, about so what can we possibly do? What parts are people in your association going to do? Where can the municipality make it easier? But it's got to be a collaboration. Let me say something about the history of development here. I wonder what the next slide is. Oh, yeah. Okay. What do we want? We're going to go on to something different next, but let me say something about the history of development in municipalities. And this is true right across North America. What typically happens is some sort of economic activity happens. It might be at a crossroad. It might be where there's a mill connected to the railroad or something like that. And a bit of a community starts to develop. Stores, you got to have a store if you got people. Sometimes it's a company store. But these economic activities are the nucleus for a kind of growth. Almost all of North America, from the point of view of essentially this is us now, was empty of this kind of economic activity linked with the world trading system. But once there was an activity and you had this vast immigration pressure in North America, speculators, land people would move in, buy up a bunch of land, and sell it to newcomers. Builders would take advantage of this. The local stores would be delighted with it because that increased their business. The railroads or the transportation companies would be delighted with this because that increased their business and so on. Notice I'm not talking about a kind of development that was driven by the towns. What happened at the town level is people basically had to organize themselves to make sure that there were roads that got cleaned. They had to organize their own schools and so on. The development process was driven by initially immigration, land speculators, real estate people. And every now and then somebody would say, hey, this is a great place to build a sawmill because there's a waterfall and I've got power, or a pulp mill. Or this is the place to put my logging camp, and it just happens to be on a main road, so other businesses will be attracted. It was the businesses that drove it. And if you think about development, it really was the developers and the land speculators that drove a great deal of local development. One consequence was most town councils, city councils, were the local economic elite, including the speculators, the land developers. And there's always been a fight. There's always been a struggle between, if you want, the ordinary citizens and the people who were actually driving the development for their own interests. We sort of moved past that now, so that councils are supposed to be completely independent of they're both supposed to be completely independent of these business interests, and you have to declare that you have no pecuniary interest in anything, which makes Sean's participation interesting, doesn't it? Because he does have a little bit of a pecuniary interest as a developer, as a builder. That's not a contradiction, but it has been a problem in many cases, and some people are terribly alerted to it. And it's led to situations where the business organizations are held at arm's length. And you get chambers of commerce and they sort of lobby a little bit. In a small community, somehow or other, you've got to take on resolving that separation. Okay? We're in a different world. If you're going to make progress now, you're going to have to build a collaborative structure in which the municipality does work with, not be governed by just the business interests, but really does work with them. And mostly that happens. Municipalities are generally, and councils are generally very pro-business because it's so important to their communities. But there's always a bit of a challenge here. And there's often lots of complaints about council coming from chambers of commerce and business organizations, and the other way around. Part of if there's a solution, it's got to be in resolving those and putting everybody who's got an interest in it to work on finding opportunities. Okay, so that was my introduction to what do we want. Let's talk about development. We're now at an hour and a half. Can you keep going, you guys? Okay.
I need a 5-minute break.
You want a 5-minute break? Okay. I'll make myself another cup of coffee and be back. I'll see you in 5 minutes. That'll make it about 10:40, eh?
Perfect. Thank you.
That gets me back at 1, which is when I want to start preparing for my 3 o'clock. I'll walk it and then a nap at this point. Okay. That's good, thank you. I was gonna come and ask you. Is that egg for me, by the way? Yeah. Maybe I'll have it now.
Want some chocolate?
Hello, nice to see you, Barney. I wondered who was behind that blank screen. Sorry, I'm a little bit
Oh,
slow.
and there I are. I've just got it. I'll fix my hair. I,
Yours, like mine, I imagine, is getting more and more difficult as you get older.
only the eyebrows you can see. I do have a follow-up question on something you said there a short while ago.
Terrific, that's what I want.
Regarding more involvement of the community, but you were somewhat hesitant of possible business associations in that some people may be concerned. An alternative what might be considered, and in our case, I relate to council members who represent the various wards. And if each one of them suggested a skilled individual in their area that would wish to participate in the community effort toward that sustainable growth, would that be an alternative that would fit your strategy?
Was someone else wanting to add the comment there?
No, sorry, I was, but I went off mute. Someone was still talking. Sorry.
Barney, I think it's a great idea for council members to make a list of people that they want to pull into some kind of activity, who got ideas, who got some willingness to work and so on, because there is so much you can do in a community if people are working. So that's a great idea. I think the question about the business community is it has a specific set of needs. Well, actually, to be careful, business community is very diverse, right? Lots of different businesses, views, people. But they also they're the ones who know where their own business has opportunities that might be helped if council could clear some regulation away, or just help them find what they need, or maybe get sort of 2-year student. What do they call those positions when we exploit students for 2 years? Does anybody remember? Internships are a great thing, and if you can think of ways to get them into the community, it's good, because some of those interns across Northern Ontario fall in love with the communities. They find jobs because someone's looking for someone, and boy, this bright young person is great. And that starts to be an avenue into more young people, and so it can help a business, it can help the council. It's a bit of a crapshoot trying to trying to get these positions, but they're really good. They're really valuable. You just set them on some project, like working with the business community to find what you could do to promote business across the way and to come up with it, and you have to make up something that sounds like it's brilliant. But well, yeah, if you're applying for money, one of the problems is applying for money and applying for the support can take more time than the value you get out of it. You have to take some care. But still, it's worth it. And Barney's point, somebody with the skill and interest to push something like that along is what you need. Your staff is busy, council members are busy. You got to recruit someone else if you're going to open up a new window. So that's about. Okay, shall we start? And what I'd like to do before I go on, because we've done 2 of my topics, is ask each of you to tell me one takeaway from the first hour and a half of Dr. Robinson's babble. Okay, I'll tell you what my takeaway is right away, is you guys know a lot. I'm really quite impressed with how open and how knowledgeable each of you seems to be. Now, that's some experience I've had in other places, but it's very vivid here. So a starting point for me is, maybe to pick up on Barney's point, there's a lot of talent, knowledge, and skill here. And that's a good thing. So how about we start with Joe? What's your takeaway? Or
Well, you've reinforced that we're not entirely unique in South Algonquin, that we share a lot of problems with Ontario North, with people moving away, communities shrinking, businesses trying to expand and develop, diminishing labor force to do that. Like your vicious circle there was, I think it's embedded in my brain.
oh, wonderful. That's a success. You'll get the slides if you want to remind yourself sometime what it is. Who's next? Joan, I see you next. I'm going around the table, the 4 people I can see. We've had.
I do have to agree with Joe. I think seeing that vicious cycle is somewhere where I think we could take each one and identify our strengths as well as our weaknesses to get a better grasp on I guess, outlooks for goals and possibly some achievements along the way. I think we do have our strengths, but we do have our weaknesses.
Yeah. I think Sean is next on my circuit.
And it's kind of funny, before Joe even spoke, or Joan for that matter, your sphere is embedded in my head. And it is a broken circle in our case. And I think what the important part of your, that graph, or would you call it a graph, is the missing pieces. And I think that's very important for us to implement or fix what is missing there to make that circle complete.
Yeah. When I'm doing presentations in class, we often put these sort of schematics on a blackboard. One thing I love about blackboard presentations is it's so easy to add a couple extra pieces or erase something as our minds get clearer. It's kind of hard to do with a presentation like this, but it would really be valuable to sort of talk about each of the connections and what breaks down or what doesn't, and fill up, develop further or thinking about it. Let's see, who's next here? I guess I can see, is that Lori?
Bill, Lori, I'm here.
Yeah, there's no sort of logical order because camera keeps moving on me. So
I don't know, I'm just puzzled every time I go over to Huntsville. There's always some change happening, some growth over there. I don't know how we could even start with some sort of tourist attraction. I don't know, something small.
Yeah, that's interesting. Comparison is a good idea. Ah, okay, I see Bill next. How about Bill?
Well, the circle that you came up with is exactly how it just brought to light the visualization of what I've been saying for a while, actually, because I've noticed that everything's intertwined and connected. So we've got to find we've got to find our appropriate starting point and start working through that circle.
Right.
And get creative in what we're doing and treat this more like a business operation.
One of the challenges is if you get a bunch of smart people in a room, they all have pieces of the picture. They all know there's a bunch of connections, but each one wants to start where they're clear and fit everybody else's pieces into theirs. And it's often very hard to get a kind of agreed on framework. And, you know, that diagram is not perfect at all. It's just one way of getting at it. But if it helps you organize your thinking, if it helps you identify where the issue you're interested in relates to the issues other people are talking about, that can be quite helpful in pursuing your thinking about something as a group. Sandra, how about you?
Well, I was hoping you'd miss me out because
Oh, but I
I'm
love
gonna
your accent. This is a
I'm going to be brutal here, Dr. Robinson. I don't think today you've told us anything that we didn't already know. I'm sorry, I'm just laying it down as I see it. What we need is we need some guidelines of what we do next. You've laid down the background, you've put it up in visual and the circle cycle. We all know that. We all have been living that for the last 15, 20 years. What can we do to deal with it? You're here to assist us and point us and give some guidelines of what we can do to improve things. Because everything you've said, yeah, we all know that. So I'm sorry.
okay. No, that's a absolutely fair comment. And I'm always aware when in doing a presentation or teaching a class for that matter, that a lot of what has to happen is getting what we already know out and recognized.
Yes.
And so that's what I've been trying to do. And I mean, I could have started with a whole list of recommendations. And maybe that would work, maybe it wouldn't, but you're completely right. One thing I do want though is to kind of validate and make you guys all aware of how much you do know already, because that's where you're starting from. And if we've talked it through together, maybe it's a little more clearly a shared view with some more shared references. So that's the logic. I could be wrong. I could be useless to you. Absolutely. I mean, I hate to admit it, Sandra, but it's entirely possible I'm useless. But I'm trying.
No, I didn't mean that.
No, I'm not insulted. I think you said something valuable. I think you said.
I was being brutal, but I actually feel, okay, you've laid down everything that we already know. Let's spend the next hour doing something actually progressive.
Okay.
And just standing still, you know?
Right. That sounds like something that I would have expected from Joe to be brutal about.
Yeah, well, him and I are very similar in some ways.
Who have I missed? Lori? Did I miss Lori? No.
No.
I will soften it a little bit because I think what we needed was you to tell us and have us all on the same page. But I'll soften that a little bit, just because that's what I do, is try to soften things.
Good. Well, thank you for the softening. Yes, who have I missed? Ethel, I
Mayor-
guess? Pardon?
Mayor LaValle?
Bill.
And Bill.
No.
No, you got Bill.
Mela Valley, I'm not sure she's still there.
Here,
Come in, Ethel.
okay, so I agree with what everyone else has said. I think what we have to do is try to move ahead in terms of where do we go from here? How do we do it? And how do we come up with a process where we're all working together? Because my view of the world right now is everyone's trying to steer the ship, but we're all steering the ship a different way. And I'm not saying anything is right or wrong, or the methods that doing is right or wrong. I'm just saying that if we're going to be a successful township, we have to have this boat going the same way. So that's where I'm at.
Sounds good. Okay, that is everybody, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, we haven't heard what Brian has to say yet.
Oh, okay. Did you get anything out of this, Brian?
Well, David, we've talked many times. I think that a lot of this leads to strategic partnerships within the community and ensuring that the people are brought to the table to start. This is a start, and that's really what I wanted today, was to get us started, to get us to understand we're all on the same page. We all understand the problem, and to start talking about ways of steering the ship in the same direction at the same time.
Okay. So the phrase in that Brian brought is the importance of strategic partnerships, which sounds like one of the big things that's on my picture that makes Brian the star. Strategic partnerships. Okay, let's go. So what's development? This is what we're after. Here's a definition. It's a process that creates growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. That's a dictionary definition. It sounds pretty passive, doesn't it? That's a standard definition. You look in textbooks, that's what you'll find. A process. Okay, I'd like to suggest a slight rewrite of this. And that is, let's say development is improving the economic, political, or social well-being of a people. Shorter, more active, it's an active verb, and it's got the same basic components in it: physical, economic, environmental, social, so on. Okay, now it looks simple, but you really have to work on every single word in the definition. What do you mean by the economic well-being? What do you mean by the political well-being? What do you mean by the social well-being? Who are the people? Who are the people? I mean, that's always who you're responsible for everybody. You're not everybody. Who's left out? Can you improve the situation for everybody? What does it mean to improve? Those are all serious conceptual problems. I spend a 3-hour course, a 3-hour session on this kind of definition, and we're not going to do it now. Much as I love to, but I would like you to hang on to that definition and recognize all of the complexity in it. There's really 3 target zones. There is a people that it's for, and there's a notion of improving that you've got to be clear about. And this goes back to that 100 visitors, can we convert them, that we heard right at the beginning. Improving would be increasing that 100 to 120. Improving, that's how. Improving would be converting 15 more of that 100 to thinking about moving into the community. Why would that matter? Well, it would improve the economic situation. It would improve your revenues. It would mean you had more people for everybody to associate with, which is part of what makes people happy. There's a really important study, the happiness report, that some top flight economists do. And so they've looked at all of the things that affect people's happiness around the world. And I usually spend a big chunk of time on this in a class too. But what they discovered is what made people happy wasn't the economic. What made people happy was feeling they had support from the people around them. That was an absolutely crucial part of it. Social connection and solidarity was part of it. If you believe you're in a community that supports you, you are happier. And they compared countries that had high levels of that particular measure and low levels. And what they discovered is that the countries that had high levels of that measure reported themselves, people in those countries reported themselves quite a lot happier. Guess where they were? It was the Scandinavian countries, the northern countries. So you're in the right place. Can you get that kind of solidarity, community cohesion? Can you work on building it? That would be improving social well-being. And it's often easier to work in that direction than the economic, which is, of course, your business, community's job, and very much vulnerable to what's happening in the larger world. The economy isn't pushed from inside South Algonquin, but your social structure and your social relations are, and they turn out to be very important for the well-being of the people. So if we break those three things down, and let's not go through all of this, but let's just say you got people, you want to know what they can do and what will affect them. You've got three categories, which means you don't have one topic on the table. I think it's really important to understand that there are three strands or three separate topics in development. In a sense, they come together, they overlap, but you need to keep clear that they're all part of your responsibility or your interest. And under each of them, there's a bunch of specific topics. In the social area, can you improve the schools? Is there anything you can do to make schools more attractive? Or what about daycare? Now, daycare is often a municipal responsibility, absolutely crucial for part of the population. Improved communication in the community. You guys are threatened by the fact that you can't afford in your community the kind of healthcare services and rely on other communities. And therefore, people, when they reach a certain age, may have to leave because they don't have the healthcare facilities they need here. So those are some of the social items. And the economic, jobs, transportation, housing, finding appropriate industries are some of the things that you might want to be considering. Each of them is a conversation, which is one of the things that makes talking about development such hard work. Each of them. Is someone speaking to me or responding? No? Okay. On the political side, among the sort of agenda items, working with other municipalities. These are things that your EDO typically does. Your mayor meets with other mayors. This is part of developing various strengths in your community. You're going to have to deal with the Algonquins when they get their treaty territories settled. That's going to be really, really interesting and exciting. And we've been talking a little bit about the local organizations, about strategic alliances, to use a word that some clever person said. What's this table? What is this slide really doing? It's breaking that out and making sure we all understand that there are several big areas of development, each of them with their own sub-concerns. And some of us are interested in one, some of us are interested in another. Some of us think this one is the absolute crucial one. So for instance, my graph had housing in red. We think that's an important one. Maybe that's the one to deal with. Maybe it isn't the one you can deal with. Okay.
Can you go back to that slide for a moment, please, Dr. Robinson?
This one?
Because I think the one that is leaping out of the screen at me is the one that we are lacking in all areas. Jobs, transportation, housing, and appropriate industry. We haven't got any of those. The others we can develop and do a little bit with and bring them up to reasonable standards. But the economic part of that slide is the one that's giving us the big headache.
Right. Absolutely. And it's also the hardest one because you have fewest levers, least power there. It's
Yes.
the one where globalization and the railroads removing their lines through the region, and all of which is driven by outside economics, is what put you where you are. Negotiations over softwood lumber with the United States affects the prices of and the pay in your community and the output from your community. Regulations over the environment that are brought in by the federal and provincial government affect the amount of harvest, limit whether or not you're doing any kind of intensive forestry. The fact that Scandinavian countries and the northeastern states have far more private property in their forests. They hire more foresters and they produce more per hectare. Why is that? Our crown forests are not terribly productive, and it's true that a lot of the northern forests are simply not super productive. But it's also interesting that somewhat comparable regions and comparable countries like Sweden get higher production out of the same amount of land and forest of similar species. So, and you don't control that. So all I can say there, Sandra, is yeah, it's the hard one. But the other thing I can say is those other two areas can make a difference because it's a circle. If people are happy, if they're getting the support they need, if they want to live there, among other things, they make jobs. It is people that makes jobs. In the traditional development, the way you got more jobs was people moved in and made more jobs. They were attracted to jobs that were there, but as you get more people, they create more jobs, whether it's a store, whether it's a shoe cleaner, whether it's a newspaper, whatever. When they're not moving in, which is the current situation, that dynamic isn't there. Anyway, I hope that's a bit of a response. You may have to focus on the other ones, is what I'm saying. And that may be your best long-term strategy. But let's go on. I think there are potentially economic strategies around tourism in particular, collaborating with the mills perhaps around housing development, collaborating with First Nation around housing development. So in the background, of course, is economic catastrophe and stuff like that. Guess what? I mean, we talk about how consumerism is eating the globe and so on. It's not our concern now. So I like this picture. It's something that we talk about in my environmental economics course, among other things, but it's not the issue for us. So we're not doing anything, any sort of moralizing about how you have to save. Okay, but we do need to talk about sustainable development nonetheless, because you're worried that your community's in decline. You're worried, in other words, that it is not sustainable economically and socially. So sustainable development has a standard definition. you're meeting the needs of the present. That means people who are in your community are managing to keep alive and be reasonably comfortable. That's all it really means, without compromising the ability of future generations. That means without cutting down all the forests so there's no jobs in the future, without destroying the water, without doing damage to the resources that your community's built on. This comes from the Brundtland Commission, and obviously it's a nice idea. It's very, very similar to something that comes out of the First Nations. You've heard of 7 generations thinking, right? Everybody heard of that idea?
No, I have not.
Yes, the natives
The
use
natives.
that concept all the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Within a lot of First Nations community, this is part of an ideology that says, you know, they were always taking care of the land and thinking about the effect of their actions on 7 generations ahead. I have an Indigenous friend who says, no, it's 3 generations behind, 3 generations ahead, and us, that's 7, but don't worry about the details. They take pride in talking at length about how it's going to affect the children and the grandchildren and the children after that. Will they be over harvesting? I'm not sure I entirely believe the claims that First Nations were that terrific about taking care of the land. I mean, they did wipe out the beaver as soon as there was a market for beaver, for example. So it's a little iffy, but the idea of sustainable development is the same idea you're getting from that side of the table in a lot of negotiations with First Nations. So it's useful to be able to recognize that that's something, in a sense, we all agree on. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly talk about 3 sides of sustainability in practice. One of them is mitigation. And when people talk about mitigation, they're primarily talking about cutting carbon dioxide emissions, stopping using fuels. That's not your... More noise coming in from somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't think mitigation is big on the agenda right now. Let's skip it. Adaptation is important for you to keep in mind. You're facing a warmer world. In Canada, in November and December, temperatures were 5.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. 5.2. You've heard this talk about 1.5 degrees. Keep the world at 1.5. Ontario passed 2 degrees 10 years ago. The world's going to get a lot warmer. When you're thinking about your development plans, when you're thinking about your tourism industry, you need to be thinking a bit about what it'll be like in 10 years in a significantly warmer world. That might mean people don't want to go to the Caribbean on cruise ships anymore because it's too hot, or they can't because the carbon taxes have gotten too high, and that would be good for us. Or they might be thinking Algonquin Park is the last surviving forest in North America that we can get to. We've got to go there, and therefore you've got a huge opportunity. I think you may have an opportunity around that. You know, come
That
and see.
would be us looking at the fact that this year our snow was so, snow season was short if we had any at all. And it would make you as a tourist attraction look at other things that you could promote, whether or not it's ATV or, you know, forest bathing, etc. So yes, I see where that would be in the future, looking down that road.
Yeah,
Like big resorts, right? So ski resorts are having.
Completely right. Skiing is likely not to be a big revenue generator in the next while. Cross-country skiing is going to be more occasional, which might be something you could play up. If you think about it, it's now scarce. Is there a chance to sort of concentrate on a short cross-country ski season and get some mileage out of it from people who don't get a chance to cross-country ski anymore? Because there's going to be a lot less snow anywhere south of you. Possible.
Just ask a question while we're talking about this, though, like changing what we do. Well, we're not a business. So at the end of the day, we're a council. Yes, we want to support things, but yet a lot of people in town are looking at us to do something. And I think this is where the disconnect is, because we're going, well, we're not a business.
I'm almost tempted to say, Brian, what would you say about that? He's gone to sleep.
Brian was sleeping with
No,
his eyes
I
open.
think we missed some of your comment there.
I was suggesting that maybe that's something for Brian to comment on.
I mean, certainly, there are certain responsibilities in municipalities as it relates to ensuring we're active in promoting ourselves or putting the right things in place for development of business and otherwise. But as to the day-to-day operations of the business and preparing themselves for a warmer planet and such, that those are really business plans that businesses really should be starting to think about, because this winter is a prime example. You're likely not going to be able to rely on the snowshoers, the skiers, and the snowmobilers to sustain you. And so you need to rethink your business model probably.
Yeah. Now, this is where one of the places where there is an opportunity, though. Council can bring together the people who depend on these winter snow activities. Council can say, what are you thinking? And let people share their knowledge about it. Council can say, look, we're already at 5 degrees warmer than traditional. We're not going to have a lot of snow on a regular basis in the future. Maybe not even next year. We expect it to be a bit cooler because of certain climate features, but maybe even next year, your season is going to be shorter, and the year after that, it's not going to be back to normal. So what are we going to do about that? How do we advertise our community? What goes on our website that makes it possible for people to know that you're targeting, say, just these 2 months, or you're going to make a flexible snowmobile season, or whatever? How do we help you take advantage of what opportunities remain? That's something you can do. It's not money you're putting into it. Maybe a little bit of advertising or work on your website, maybe some leaflets that are left around the community so that visitors pick up on the vision that you have and your operators have. What about your advertising fishing? What happens to the fish population over the next 5 years? Do your outfitters and the people who actually sell fishing opportunities know or have an idea? Have they agreed on it? Because they're doing advertising today that's affecting their market 3 years out. Do we have that right? This is a coordination problem. Anyway, Joan, I'm picking up on your point. That's all. Adaptation. Obviously, since you're dependent on nature tourism, that's one of the places where thinking it through, developing shared ideas and a shared strategy is probably really helpful. And I point out it's only your time that you're spending, not your money. Your precious time, alas.
Something that I haven't, myself personally, thought about how to adapt to a changing climate.
As a hobby gardener, I'm kind of looking forward to warming climate. I can actually have 2 months in a row without frost.
Yeah. The season is getting longer for all kinds of things. Means you're going to get different pests. You're going to be able to grow different plants. It's quite exciting. I'm a gardener too. So I'm with you.
My point of saying that is, rather than woeing the situation where it's getting calmer and we can no longer rely on the traditional avenues of tourism, we have to think the positive parts of a warming climate and take advantage of those, if there is any.
That's right. Your shoulder seasons, as they're called, are going to get longer. The spring comfortable time, the comfortable periods in the spring and the fall are going to get longer. Your the colors in the fall are going to shift a bit. All sorts of things that you can take advantage of if you can get your mind around them. So you're right. That's really important to say, Joe. There will be opportunities emerging. Barney, were you going to say something?
Yeah, may I add something in there? In that tourism has been in the township for many, many, many years. It's been adapting to changes all those years. It will adapt continually, but does not add significantly to any growth in the township. Some significant change or industry or additional completely different thing needs to be envisioned, planned in accordance with the strategic plans and all the others, such that we are not totally dependent on tourism alone. We need additional variety and such that we can adapt to anything and everything that's going on and have significant growth, including population and business of various kinds, not strictly tourism.
Tourism comes up as one of the places where adaptation has to happen. Another place where adaptation has to happen is, and the province doesn't have an adaptation strategy for the forestry sector at this point. They've been hiding their heads. I have been nattering about this for 20 years. They've told their biologists to keep their mouths shut, which is
and our people in the township have been adapting to it all that time.
Yep. But you haven't had any sort of clear ideas of two things. What is the most likely path forward for forests in your area? What's going to happen? And how are the rules going to change so that you can take advantage of them? Because it's not clear that the harvesting structures that you have are the right ones. And the truth is, I don't know the answer to that. I've been trying to get in. I've got a forester that I'm talking to about this and various others. But the province has the responsibility for those forests and hasn't told us. And that's a problem.
Okay, and that's all fine. But even with all those adaptations and all the changes, the end result budget coming into the township for the sake of tourism will have minor changes. And that's the point. That's the point, is we need more growth, not just sustained on the same level. We need significantly more.
Absolutely great. You're standing in a situation where you're going to lose parts of the tourism activities that you've been relying on, and maybe others are going to be coming up. What you tell to the public, your common voice to the public, the advertising, is something that it's got big returns to scale. So a whole bunch of organizations are trying to say, to get to the minds of the tourists, you need a vision of what you are and what you're going to be that attracts people, to help maintain those tourism operators. And there is room to expand somewhat. There may be room to expand a lot with the right strategies. Hard to say, but you're right. It's only one of it's one of your two big industries. Right? That's it. The other is forestry, and there's blockages there. Where do we go with the rest? That depends on population. How do you get a little more population? We've got problems. Okay, I want to say one more thing. The thing that people leave out when they talk about mitigation and adaptation is preparation. One of the things that's happening with a warmer world is it's also a much more variable world. We're getting wild weather. We're getting massive rainstorms in various places and floods. We're getting forest fires more frequently. We're getting power outages because of unexpected ice storms. The grid in Ontario is getting a bit more fragile. There's a lot of risk at the community level. That's one of the things you have to respond to. Preparation to take care of your people is an important part of making your community attractive. If you can convince people that you really are taking care of them, that will help. Now I'm going to leave that. What I do want to say is it's a little bit like that previous graph that had 3 areas. Within sustainability, there are these 3 areas, and under each of those categories, there's a big collection of possible actions, some overlap between them. I don't think you're going to be buying electric buses in the future, for instance, which is what all the talk is in Southern Ontario. You are actually eager to have what they call sprawl in the South. That is, more houses being built on the edge of the community with their own septic tanks. There's all sorts of complicated and interesting questions in each of these categories. We aren't going to do that now. I'm just making this list. Part of the reason for making this list is so that when the conversation in your planning process goes in those directions, you're all aware. You got to break it into the different categories, and then within each of them, there's a lot of different discussions. Okay. Do you have an emergency team for getting people who are older in some of these relatively remote cottagey homes out if there's major transportation problems? How do you do that? Whose problem is it to rescue seniors who can't get out of their homes? I just asked the question. I don't want to talk about that right now because that's part of planning, and it's part of development planning. It's not the central issue. As Barney and Sandra pointed out, how do we get out of the big problems? So on to the next thing. Let's talk about what we have to work with a bit more. This is where you're going to have to contribute more, because this is where your knowledge of the community is better than mine from 20,000 feet or wherever I'm sitting. 3 quick facts that are striking. You've got a population of about 1,000. That's really small. It's so small that it isn't a magnet. Populations are magnets. Small populations are very, very weak magnets. 365 people are 65 years and older. Now, this was in 2021 when the census was done. Don't trust the numbers exactly. That is more than a third of your population is of retirement age. That's really unusually high. The average age is 54. You know what the average age for Canada is? Or for Northern Ontario, it's 44, 45. 10 years older than the average for Northern Ontario. Joel, notice that you're different. And here's your population distribution. You see that big bump? This is unusual, I gotta say. You see that big bump? This is a population distribution that has a bump pretty much like China has, which is being described as heading into a demographic disaster. China, the whole country, is going into a demographic disaster, and that bump is about as a third as high for China, and it's also a little bit to the left. So if the Admirable Peter Zayan were to look at your demographic chart, he would say, You are now the world's worst country. No, South Algonquin is not a country. The worst demographic situation in the world. No country is as bad as this. Let's look at interesting detail about this, by the way, just for fun, is you're also unusual because you have surplus men. Now, maybe you don't think there could be surplus men. Surplus younger men is always a problem in a community, but that's not the distribution. It's interesting, between 35 and 45 in this area here, you've got about 20 excess men. And in this age, 75 to 79, you've got another 20 excess men. What do you do with that? Pardon?
Said they worked their wives to death, I guess, huh?
Oh, there's a thing.
Or we should be promoting more women to move to South Algonquin. That's surplus
Well,
men.
okay, maybe there's an opportunity there. Yeah.
It's Ethel.
I mean,
Vicky?
pardon? Yeah, Ethel?
I find this slide very interesting because when I look around, for example, Whitney, and I look at the houses, and I find in terms of my count, there's actually more women living alone in homes than I thought were less men. So I find this slide really interesting.
There are more women living alone, according to the stats. One way you might see that is at the tail end out here. There's a few more women between. There were more women between 85 and 89.
Thanks a lot. It was hard to see.
Anyway, this is a basic piece of data for understanding what you've got to deal with. If you look at the workforce, it's sort of skewed, eh? The green line just goes around the workforce. According to Stats Can, in that age, you had about 650 people of working age. Now, they're not all working. You've got very slightly above average unemployment and slightly below average participation, but not strikingly different in that area. What is striking is a workforce that goes along and then suddenly you've got a bunch of people who are approaching retirement quite quickly. Will they all retire? Well, some retire before, some retire after, some leave, some don't. Labor force survey comes up with somewhat different numbers. I don't think that changes the logic appreciably. But we should look at a couple of other breakdowns of this. Your school age population, you got about 75 kids between 15 and 20. It's not clear all of them are going to school. You've got about 30, I would guess, as a maximum, taking the high school bus to Barry's Bay. Does that sound right? You got one busload of kids going to Barry's Bay every day?
Our kids are split up. Some go to high school in Barry's Bay and some go to high school in Bancroft.
Woo! Catholic school in Bancroft, is it?
No, they're both in the public system,
But that's the south end and it's closer to go to Bancroft?
no, before a high school existed in Barry's Bay, all of the high school age kids in South Algonquin went to Bancroft. And since the high school in Barry's Bay has been open for 40 years, I think, and everybody hasn't transitioned the other way yet.
Huh, that's interesting.
It is.
Does that?
Well, it was because the Bancroft worked on a trimester and Barry's Bay worked on a semester system. So there was more interest probably from a teenager saying, well, I'd sooner do the trimester and head to Bancroft.
and have friends all year.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's part of the social structure that, you know, the school boards decide what they're going to do and you don't get to decide about it, but it's something that does affect the structure of your community in important ways and may be worth discussing. In any case, let's go on a little bit. You got a group of under 200 people in the childbearing age, and they're not all bearing children, by the way. One feature that pops out if you read through the StatsCan long list of numbers is you are very different in that 40% of the couple family households, that is where there's a married or sort of, what's the other word there? Living together. In common law relationship, 40% of them don't have children. So the couples in your community don't have kids. They may be older. That's probably a big part of it. Compared to Ontario's 24%. You could see that if you took the couples and they're spread through this big boom here, a lot of those would be without children, which probably explains it. Now you're going to recognize that group. Right? That's the baby boom. Important to remember that because unless you're renewing that group, well, think about it. But notice how big it is. It's half of your population is baby boomers. This is a culturally very unusual group society that you're in. Half of it is baby boom. What else could we say about that? Well, we could say that probably all of the council is coming from that group. Sean claims he's not. I know Tracy's not, but he's Tracy is not part of the council really. So the baby boomers are running your community. And that's good because you're wise and experienced and have some time perhaps. But it's bad because you don't really represent the community very, very well, probably. And I don't mean that as a criticism. You must know that's true. You don't, what do the kids want? What connection do you have to those kids? If I ask the question, it's a struggle, and it's a struggle in every community I talk to. Okay, so if we took out that baby boom, that's what the population would look like. There's a surplus. A third of the population could be seen as surplus baby boomers. Now, you guys aren't in that class. You're the ones I left here. The rest of them are out. Why is that at all interesting? Well, because people don't stick around forever. You've already mentioned this. Roughly speaking, there is a kind of attrition rate in your population. So if you just move your population distribution forward by 5 years and then another 5 years, and so on, 1941 by 2041, just 17 years from now, and that's a planning horizon for sure. This is what your workforce looks like. It's a lot smaller. And even those retirees are gone. Even that baby boom, concentration of homeowners in that group, even they're gone. 17 years out, your population looks really different. That's what you're planning for. So when you talk about growth, what you're actually just living in is a decline. Workforce decline, retiree population decline. I'm sorry. I mean, I usually do this a little earlier in the session so that I can say I'm depressing you now, but it gets better.
Well, thank you. I hope there's an upside to this.
Well, I think that's reality all across the nation and globally, probably. I mean, we as the baby boomers never really replaced ourselves, right? So You know, you're lucky if you have a family of two. You know more, know more of the 4 to 6 kid range, right? Because we couldn't afford to do that, nor did we want to, I guess, but that is very typical of what you're seeing right now and in our own chart, but nationwide too.
Yeah, Joan, it's typical conceptually, but quantitatively, it's much worse for you guys.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Nonetheless, nothing happens 17 years out. This is where you are.
Right.
Now, think of what that means for the mills. They've lost all their experienced workers. Think about that, what that means for your tourism operators. There's going to be turnover right across the board over the next 17 years in your tourism operations, all your stores. Most of the ownership of businesses is concentrated, if we go back a little bit, in this area of late workforce and early retirement ages.
We see that, right? We see that now because I think there's several businesses that have, sort of a for sale sign on them in hopes that somebody will come and buy so they can retire, they're tired. Or have family take over, which there doesn't seem to be the interest either.
There are Northern Ontario communities working hard on succession plans.
Right.
Your economic plan ought to have its strategy about succession planning. There's a group way out in the west of the province actually running succession planning sessions. There are several other organizations that do it. So put it on your agenda, helping with succession, finding buyers. You know who's buying businesses in Northern Ontario right now?
You can imagine.
I know who's buying them in South Algonquin.
Who?
Immigrants.
Exactly. Indian families?
Yes.
Especially?
Yes.
Not just Indian, Mexican families. I have an acquaintance who's been recruiting Mexicans to purchase businesses. It's great. They want to come. They bring some money. They're expecting to work reasonably hard, like everybody did before them. But they want a business because they've got a bit of money and they want to get it out of where they are. So succession planning probably means tying your businesses into local people who might be interested, but also those immigrant chains. Okay. So we've got another agenda item there. Sandra, I don't know if you thought of that already. Did you?
Yes. Very much so, because without succession, even that we have will die. So we've got to put succession in, but businesses themselves should be looking to that. I don't believe that is a council issue. When I ran my business, I was very much aware of this. Right from 10 years out before I even sold, we were thinking about strategies for succession. And I don't think some of the businesses here in South Algonquin are thinking ahead. They're not planning ahead. What if? What do I do if? How do I sell this successfully? What do I put in place to make this more desirable for somebody to buy? And succession is really important.
Okay, so what you heard was two slightly contradictory things from Sandra. One, it's the business's own responsibility. And two, some of them aren't doing it, and that's going to have negative effects for your community. Okay. just, it should be on the table when you're thinking about business. You'd love to have business expansion, and yet we're looking at a situation where we are likely facing business contraction. That's the story. Unless you replace those older operators in the tourism sector and the store owners and the contractors, not you, Sean. We're not in a hurry to replace you, but
So
sure.
can you give us an example of how a township council economic development committee could help in this?
One thing is, now maybe Brian knows all the businesses where people are approaching, because that's one of the things your economic development officer does, and especially in small communities. We've got all of these businesses, whether it's a contractor, a repair operation, an auto shop, and so on. The owners are 55, 65. They are starting to think about retiring. Do their kids want to take over? Do they have someone they want to pass it on to? Could we help with the financing? Now, there are a whole bunch of people out there who have been working hard on detailed advice about how to develop a succession plan, how to get people to develop succession planning. There are people in the banking industry. There's a federal program that does some stuff in these areas. What they would want to do, and Joan, is come in and do a whole session on succession planning and ask you to get, well, maybe you get Sean to, or maybe you get Barney to line up all the businesses that are in the right age group and try to get them into a room to talk about it. That would be your first step. You're not gonna do it really. You're only gonna facilitate. That's all you can do. The facilitating is going to be an important role. And the question I put to you is, who else is going to do it? That's your problem. Sandra's right. It is the business's problem. Sandra's almost certainly right that some aren't thinking about it and some don't have any idea how to do it. And it may well take some outside help. Can you find some outside help for them? One of the development banks can provide funding for succession, that is, loans to people who are taking over a business from where they've worked for a long time. This isn't my area of expertise. I just know that people are doing it and that they've got a bunch of pieces. If you want to take that up, it's a project by itself. Unfortunately, so many of these things are projects by themselves. And in most communities, there'll be a few people who really work on it. Do you have a few people? That's part of your challenge, Joan.
No, I thank you for, I think, answering my question.
I'm not sure.
We would be facilitating those things, right? I mean, again, a lot of people turn around in the community and say, well, the council's not doing anything, township's not doing anything. So we have to establish what this committee and council should be doing and not doing.
Well, part of it too is when you're doing the succession plan, it's not just a dollar and cents, it's
No.
business. You know, I've done a number of them myself, and sometimes they take years to do because it all depends what the owner wants to do, what the outcome of the business is.
Business, right.
Like, do they want to pass it on? Do they want to do it, do it reasonably slowly? But yeah, it's just a matter of giving them advice and pointing them in the right directions.
Yeah. Do they want to pass it on to their workers? And for mills, that's sometimes a possibility, converting to a cooperative operation where they keep a manager, but the workers own it. That's worked in a number of places. Threatened with mill closures, just to give you another example. Okay, that was more bad news, of course, but there is a response, and part of the response is business succession planning. your big problem is still how do you get more younger people into this labor market? Because you've got a hole in your labor market that isn't new, it's already started.
I think we have an opportunity here where businesses should be looking to adapt to what they are doing for the changing of what people want. But also, should we not be majoring on the fact that half our population is of retirement age? Should we not be catering to that half population of the older generation? Should we not be offering activities and things for that older generation to attract more of the same? If we
Yes.
can't get the younger generation, then let's work with what we have. Let's offer incentivize people to come here from an older generation. Talk to our grocery stores. Will they do online delivery? Talk to maybe a minibus company. Will they do weekly shopping trips? Will they? There's things that we can do, I'm sure, to cater to the population we have that would be economic development, to the population that is here. And obviously, the style of population, age of population that wants to come here.
You're completely right. And one of my suggestions is a strategy for seniors. I notice that I have run on way too long. I have lots more slides, so I'm going to rush. I'm just going to skip through things. The income says your incomes are averaging a bit lower by about $10,000 on average than the Northern Ontario and Canadian averages. Something of significance is the percentage over 65 is really high, as I pointed out. It's only about 10% for Canada as a whole. It's 21% here. You're losing about 8 people a year is not really a big leakage. You're a little bit low on market and employment income. About half, you have about 1 home for each 2 people. Interesting. Few movable homes and 5 apartments, which is not very much according to StatsCan. You have a lot of single occupancy homes, but the concentration, half of those homes almost are 2 occupants, and another fifth are more occupants. So important number, 20% of your population is Indigenous. That's important, and you're going to have to start working with it more. I've mentioned this thing about generations. 885 people are 3rd generation or more out of your 1,055 or whatever it is, right? And more of those are male, interestingly. The bias is pretty strong there. People who have moved, about 1/3 had moved, but most of them had just in the last 5 years, but all the migrants reported in 2021 had come from Ontario. People are just moving around Ontario, that you're not getting attraction, you're not attracting people from all over the world in any noticeable numbers in 2021. You're a low education area. Oops, sorry. 1/3 of your population has no high school degrees. This says there is no earned doctorates. Proportionately, little under 1% in Canada. You should have about 9. So that's further evidence of low educational level. This is the industry breakdown. 23%, 24% accommodation and food services, compared to Ontario, 5.4%. You guys are very much an accommodation place. That's your tourism sector, obviously. Construction is sort of mixed. Part of it is, of course, road building and road maintenance and so on for logging. Manufacturing is your sawmills. I don't know what else you have. Agriculture, forestry, 9%. That's mostly your harvesting population. So if you add most of those together, what you've got is 25, 30% possibly dependent on forestry and a quarter dependent on accommodation. Your retail trade is actually lower than all the communities around you and Ontario, which is a bit interesting. That's probably driven partly by lower incomes and an older population. So let's skim through the strategies. I think the way you think about the strategies is you look at that population distribution, you do what Sandra was saying. Well, what about these older ones? What's our target there? What about these school-aged children? Is there something we can do to make that more successful? We have about 38 kids in the community that could need childcare. Do we have childcare? Would that make it more attractive for young families? You've got to, I think, go through this your population groups and not sort of think you can lump them all together, because they don't. They all have different needs. And particularly for growth, your target, a big target, is what would make it more attractive for families, young families in the childbearing age. That's the place you win. What would make your community better for them? Okay, so it's challenging to attract young workers. You don't have a lot of jobs available. You've got housing problems. That people would perceive this community as offering limited opportunities for their children. I don't think that's true, by the way. I think you want to say, this is the most wonderful place to raise children, and do something to make that visible. One feature is, even with low incomes, people who are working are spending less on average on their housing. If you're trying to market, what you don't emphasize fishing, you emphasize the safety for kids, a caring community, good schools. Those are things that you have to make them part of the vision of your community. You have to do things that shows you care about those. And finally, ultimately, what's going to make a difference in getting these populations is having starter homes. Cheap enough, small enough that people can move into them. When they've established an income, they can move up. The homes that people are buying and turning into part-time residences or renting out are being taken off the market as starter homes in your area. That's a challenge for you. You need a youth strategy. How are you going to keep youth there? You don't have a lot, which is really good in a sense, because you can communicate with them if you want to. You can bring them together if that's part of your goal. You can make them part of your council and get them feeling like they can participate in making the decisions. More and more communities are developing youth councils. And there's a whole organization to support this and tell you how to do it. It's hard work, but getting the kids involved in making decisions is part of what makes them feel like this is their home and they want to come back. It's also part of the way you find out what they want and how to make the community work for them. There are a lot of resources you have in terms of seniors and others who could help support young people in your community. That's another coordination problem. Technically, it's not your problem. A lot of the stuff that you could do is not technically your problem. The Municipal Act doesn't put it on your shoulders. But if you're looking at that population pyramid evolving and you want to do something about it, these are the things you have to think about. Do you have an alumni program? Do you keep track of the kids who've left? Could you get an intern in to build a roster of people who used to live here who have moved away and could be invited back for a party? I think that's a powerful tool. Takes some effort. I'd say you need some work for it if it's going to happen. Maybe that's a great idea for an internship project. I want to say this about your school, because you might be skeptical about your school's little three-room school. I went to a 3-room school. It was the best thing that ever happened. 2-room school. At a tough time in my life was the best thing that happened to me. Teachers knew me, the kids got to know me. It was a supportive place in a way that the later city schools never could be. So it's a good thing. Your 3-room school is something to advertise and praise, and it's what a lot of parents want, small, intimate schooling. So again, it's not your business. School board doesn't want you sticking your nose in this stuff. It's part of the attraction of your community. It's an asset. What about a senior strategy? Well, Sandra already covered this. Right, Sandra? I don't have to say anything more. You've got that one nailed down. There are some opportunities, like could you develop some transitional housing that would let people stay in the community longer, but not in their relatively remote house that they can no longer take care of? There's talk about that across Northern Ontario right now. Mutual help programs that would help seniors help each other. Those are things that you could sponsor or organize. They are not in the Municipal Act. You don't have to. You want to? Well, it's up to you, isn't it? You need a business strategy. The truth is that much of this, the housing issue especially, isn't your job. All you can do is help coordinate, maybe facilitate with a few regulation changes. That's it. I can't think of much else you can do with that. They create the homes, but you could do some serious coordinating. Okay, so what's coming out of this pattern is it's your voices that you're going to have to use. It's your ability to bring people together that's your biggest asset as a council. And it's what's needed, but you don't have to do it. You're not required to do it. People want it and need it, but you're not required to do it. It's not in the job description. But if you're going to deal with the problems in South Algonquin, I think that's where you need initiative. And Barney, your group too. You're going to have to get together and do this. And if there's a seniors group, you're going to have to get them in on it. And if there's a youth group, you're going to have to get them in on it. And if there's not a youth group, you're going to have to find some way to start one. Because there's only 1,000 of you now, right? This is a tiny place. And you're going to have to work together to make it a place where people want to live, which will bring and help hold people. It'll help bring people. And that's the basis of keeping the economy going. Sandra, I don't know if you feel I've told you a little bit here. I have a whole list of advice that came from my students because I asked my students in this economic development class with, I guess it's 18 economic development officers. They had a list of things. We've talked about them all, so let's skip them. I want to say something here, though, about how to approach the planning problem. I don't know if you've heard this term backcasting. It's a method. What you do is you visualize the future you want, where you want to be, and then you ask one question. What would I have to have done? Where would I have to be so that it was just one more step to get there? Okay, that's planning from the back end. That's why it's called backcasting. It's a technique developed at the University of Waterloo, actually, by a guy named Robinson. He must be brilliant, but he's no relative. You work backwards from where you want to be, figuring out what you've got to put in place, because it's just about impossible to get to where you want to go by just looking at all the roads there. If you're going to Toronto, what do? Well, you think about Toronto and you find the highway that leads into Toronto. And then you say, well, how do I get to that highway? It's this highway 60. And how do I get to 60? Well, I go up whatever road it is to 60, and then I go out. Right? That's backcasting. That's the way you plan your trips. That's the way you do your planning. You decide what kind of community you want to be. big thing. The rest of this is just figure out how you get there by starting at the end and working backwards. That involves building community capacity, getting buy-in from other leaders. And that's all I have to say. I'm sorry I've run over time. I hope this was some use to you. I've had fun, I have to say. But it's all up to you.
A lot of, thank you, Dr. Robinson. For myself personally, this was, some of it was a big eye opener. Made me think on some aspects that I never even contemplated before. Even getting together as a committee to have a seniors group, participate in what we're trying to achieve here. So, I thank you for that, for sure. That's only a small aspect of your presentation, for sure. And I'll never get your sphere out of my head.
It's Ethel.
Yes, Ethel.
Thank you very, very much. Like Councilor Pichon said, a lot to try to digest in 3 hours. And there's certainly a lot for you to put in, I'm sure, hundreds and hundreds of hours working on data and getting presentations done. So I appreciate you being with us. And I've learned a lot. Hopefully we can move ahead in the township of South Algonquin and make it a better place and place that people want to come and stay and get some housing in our community, and work on behalf of the residents of this township to the best of our abilities. So I appreciate your honesty, and I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I've actually learned a lot. I knew I would, and I knew what I was getting into. So thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Brian, maybe we'll talk a little bit after this sometime.
Certainly, I'll give you a call a little later.
No, I'm teaching a 3-hour class this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
Goodbye, everybody. I've got to get going because I promised to go for a walk with my wife before I class.
Thank you.
Nice day for that.
Good luck. I'll be watching how it goes for you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, since this is this council's first economic development meeting, I'm not sure if there's any unfinished business on the table. Okay, so new business. Would anybody like to contribute any new business to this meeting?
I would like to highlight something more than new business. A lot of time and energy is being put in with the rec committee, with children's activities, and they are doing fantastically well. But what actually sprung to my mind, looking at the demographics and everything, should we have rec committee dedicated to more senior activity, more senior events? Even if it's bringing in speakers about senior events or managing your pension in a correct way or dealing with your groceries in a different way. Just things that, looking at that demographic there made me think we spend a lot of time and energy looking at activities, recreation for the small children, but our demographic is actually the other end.
And getting back to my comment to Dr. Robinson about getting the seniors, our senior group involved in this committee, I think that is a golden idea since our demographic is shooting that way, or it is that way, right?
Yeah, we worry about the open air ice rinks for skating or broomball for the younger population. How about worrying a little bit and put a curling ice down for the older people? you know, there's things that we can, I think, diversify a little.
I think that's what we, sitting at the rec committee, of course, all the activities have been directed at the children,
Yes,
right? And then you have the seniors, which I think if you're 40, right, I can't remember the age
It is 40
breakdown,
now,
or is it
yeah.
40?
Yeah.
But you could join the seniors, right? And so then they have their planned activities, et cetera, throughout the year. So you're really missing that 20 to 40 group that, you know, want to be active, want to be social. And that is hard to get them to come out to things, particularly if there's no, you know, drinks involved, or, you know, a lot of them go to bongos every weekend and they have their social time there. But that group really gets left out.
it
So,
does.
so
And
they,
we don't even have a cab company that would take them home,
no,
you know, so you can't have a drink, you can't even have a couple of glasses of wine with a decent meal,
Right.
because that would put you over the limit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that alcohol is an issue, but it is something
It's
to bear
part
in
of their
mind,
life,
it's
right?
part of their life.
So we identified that as a, you know, what could we do? What should we do? Is there something? So those paint nights that started out down at the rec center was well attended. Now they haven't come back. They're, you know, joined forces with another young person, and they're doing paint and dinner night, which is great. I mean, it's a lovely concept, and that was, but there was something that we had hoped that would bloom and maybe generate other things for that. It's just hard. Plus, they're still working.
New business, transportation, okay, is key. Getting back to what you just commented about, we don't have a taxi service. That Uber in the previous council meeting that you brought up, that Uber is, offering these incentives.
To incentivize drivers, yeah, so they get more of the money that you pay. That's what they're offering.
So this
Or
should
a
be
cab
something.
company that would come in and run a cab, you know, a regularized or controlled cab company. We have nothing. And I fear for seniors that maybe don't want to be running a car anymore. Fuel's expensive, insurance expensive. They have no alternative. They have to run a vehicle to get into the doctors or to even get some groceries. Now that is not us as a caring community. There ought to be some sort of transportation, I believe. And it's an economic development for somebody to come in with a small people carrier and run once a week to Bancroft, once a week to Barry's Bay. You know, there's opportunity there.
It's not a viable business.
How do we know? No one's done it.
They haven't passed. They've all
Oh,
quit.
I'm
their-
sorry, they haven't done it in
There's people-
15 years. to
Well,
my
they
knowledge.
certainly have.
They did it every day about 7 or 8 years ago. There was two actually competing groups, and both of them just
Gone, disappeared. They competed until they're out of business.
There's people that do that unofficially right now.
Okay,
There's one person in Madawaska that delivers prescriptions and takes people to bingos and takes people to the doctor's appointments.
well, then we need to advertise it.
No, because they don't want to go publicly.
They don't want
because
to.
then the cost of insurance and everything. is through the roof.
Okay, so a lot of people don't know about it.
It's like an underground.
So should we be looking into something like that?
It's a council decision, but if you.
Is
go
it,
to-
well, see, this is what I'm asking.
It's like the old saying that nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a need for something, somebody will fill it. You know, if there's money to be made, somebody's gonna get in there and make money on it. If there's no money on it, then you're talking about subsidized, and then you're talking about.
Costing taxpayers, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's always been a problem with transportation in this area, because everything is so far away.
They can't, exist without being subsidized by something.
So is this something that we should pursue? This is what I'm asking.
Well, the Uber situation basically is between the driver and the Uber company. It has nothing to do with anybody per se. But if you could, try to recruit somebody.
The trouble with that is, or like a cab company or the Uber gets their cut. They don't actually contribute anything to it other than taking the reservation. But they get a cut.
Okay. But people can have the app on the phone, they feel a little bit safer because it is a sort of registered Uber driver. It's the way of the world and the way of the cities.
Exactly, it's the way of the cities, not so much here.
I think it would be a good point to discuss when we get more people on our economic development committee. That if, because again, going back to a couple things that I said was like, is that really us? Well, it is us to discuss it or bring the people together. I guess that would be why you're having an economic development, is to bring the people together and have an open discussion versus us going out and running an Uber driver, right?
Sit down and brainstorm some ideas.
Yes, and then say, hey, does anybody want to do this versus, because again, I don't think we're in I agree with you, we do need
We need some
transportation.
sort of transportation, but we are not in the transportation business.
Right. But we can have the right people sitting at the table as we're discussing some of these things.
Some municipalities are in the transportation business.
Because Bancroft has got but I think they're pretty heavily subsidized as well too. What do you call them? We call them the trout.
That's what, I was just thinking, you're trying to think what it was called, some sort of fish.
But I think it's Hastings something now. It's changed hands, but
But even places the size of Pembroke, I think they've stopped their public transportation because it's just not viable. And they got 15,000 people, we got 1,000 people. And spread over an area 3 times the size of Pembroke.
But they do have bus service in Pembroke, do they
I
not?
think it's discontinued.
I was gonna say, I haven't seen a bus in Pembroke in years.
I think it's discontinued.
There's several cab companies
Oh, oh, yeah, for sure.
that are doing very nicely and
Another piece of new business, I brought this to Brian's attention a few days back, about the Northland Bus Company, about trying to get bus service back into or onto the Highway 60 corridor. Because right now, how long has it been since back in the day was Voyageurs?
so the train, they bought 6 trains and they're coming up through
From Toronto, and they're going towards
Huntsville
north.
and going up to Parry Sound and.
That is correct. Right now, Northland, what they do is they have their bus service leaves Ottawa, and it touches Arnprior, it touches Renfrew, and then it takes Highway 17 up that route. Okay, towards Pembroke,
Across 60.
Pembroke, Chalk River, Deep River, so on and so forth.
Northland, basically when Greyhound closed, because Greyhound discontinued all services in Eastern Ontario. And after that, there was a vacuum void that was there. There's 100,000 people along the Highway 17 corridor, right? So Northland runs once a day from North Bay to Ottawa, Ottawa to North Bay. That's it, that's all for that 100,000 population. I don't know, I mean, we can certainly approach Northland, but I don't know that they're gonna make a business case for coming from Huntsville down to Renfrew.
At the Penang conference last year, and that's where Sean's getting, this is coming from, they touched on the possibility. Nobody made any promises or anything, they brought it up, that Northland is in the business of expanding their service.
So now having that connection from, say, Ottawa to Huntsville through the Highway 60 corridor, I think there's a lot of communities along the way that can benefit from it as well. It's not just us.
Even Greyhound didn't have a service from Huntsville on Highway 60.
No, they didn't. They went
It had to
via.
come from Peterborough to Pembroke
That's right.
was the run
Mhm.
come through Barry's Bay. So there was never bus service in South Algonquin.
Mhm. So, when was the last time a Voyager came down this highway?
In South Algonquin, never. They didn't run here.
Never. Wow. That's crazy. Even back in when, wow, okay.
Part of the tourist association out of Muskoka do bring people in as far as Opeongo.
And that's private.
Those are tour buses.
Tour
Yeah.
buses.
They come from, they have set up a program that bring people from Toronto and will drop them off along the way to Opeongo. They don't go any further, so I know that at the business Sabbath end, they always talked about, well, why can't you bring them right into it? You know, like that would be nice so that they could offer a package. So to come and stay and we'll provide you with this, and this. And if they could get as far as Opeongo, then it was saying, well, could we have somebody from Whitney go and get those people and then bring them in and make sure they had that travel back and forth, because the bus didn't have enough clientele. I guess the numbers weren't there to run all the way into Whitney.
That's what always happens.
Yes.
Comes down
To the numbers.
And we aren't running big buses.
Right.
I can tell you that.
Right, and some of his comments made about seniors and, the difference in, they move here to retire. They don't really, as a senior, young senior, you're not looking at, oh my gosh, I'm gonna end up, having to have some help when I'm in my 80s and, my husband's either had a stroke or dead or vice versa. And then all of a sudden, it's like a crisis, because where do they go? All their families still in the cities and they're needing some community help, right? So even way back when, all these years of nursing, that was always what you saw, was that they'd have a crisis. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, now I have to go back to the city for my sort of rusty years, not golden years, but now my rusty years, because I can't find the help here that I need. And then their places would go up for sale, and that was always that cycle was, and it sounded good to come up here. So and Elliott Lake is a prime example, right? They put themselves up as the greatest retirement place. I mean, it's probably been 10 years since I've driven into it. We were up that way. And looked around, and every place you looked, every corner, things were boarded up. It was, yeah.
They're
It's like,
selling cheap houses.
oh,
I
absolutely.
think
It was $10,000 or $15,000.
the houses all belong to the mine. When the mine closed, they sold the houses to the municipality. The municipality sold the houses for like
$10,000.
15% of the market. So, they were an easy sell.
And
But
at
again,
that
they
time,
weren't looking to the
Down the road.
future, down the road, right? So, that's the thing, it's like, as he pointed out, you sort of, once us baby boomers are off that chart, it's pretty flat,
Mhm.
pretty flat.
Okay, so the next piece of business that I have on the business here, and it has to do with economic development, and it is grant writing. Of finding somebody, within this community to begin with, that is able to do so, or searching elsewhere outside of, South Algonquin
Do
for
we
somebody to be doing
Sabbath
this.
still connected to us?
I don't know, are there?
No, looks like they're going.
Okay.
So, but I think this is a big part of the puzzle that we are missing here. The money that we are missing. For instance, if we wanted to backtrack to, and I don't even know what the process was back in the day, Joe, but the community center in Madawaska, that was all through grant.
That was more luck than design. I happen to know the guy that was in charge of FedNor, or our agent in this area that worked for FedNor. And talked to him at a conference and expressed the possibility, and he actually attended a recreation meeting and wrote out the application for us to start the ball rolling, and that,
So that was luck.
a little bit, yeah. We didn't have anybody specifically, in fact, no, I'm not gonna say.
Okay, but anyhow, getting back to this grant application process, right? If luck hadn't helped, there'd be no community center in Mount Washington.
Quite possibly, yeah.
So, that being said, I think we're missing out on stuff of people that are gonna be looking for money that we can use and don't wanna be wasting staff's time doing it because it's considerable, long process, from what I understand, to apply for some grants, not all grants, but some grants, right?
It's not just the application though either, Sean, because once you make the application, if you're successful,
Mhm.
you gotta track the grant and you've got to report on it, not likely once, but 2 or 3 times before a project's done. So it does become labor intensive. And anywhere I've checked, and I'm sure you probably were checking when you were off at the conference, there's usually grant writing people that are at these things. And their fees are exorbitant because they generally charge a percentage of the grant. So if you get $1 million grant, they might charge you 10 grand as a percentage of the grant, you know?
See,
And that's a common way that they're charging their grants out. Especially some of the ones that are doing them at, you know, basically no cost unless they get the grant. And when they do, then they get percentages, and the percentages are high.
But usually those fees are an allowable expense under the grant.
Actually, most of them aren't eligible as administrative expenses any longer.
Is that right?
Yeah, the province has tightened up a lot of the rules, so you get on the hook for the cost of writing the grant, right? So, I mean, if you're lucky and you get somebody to write it for a couple $100 a grant, then, you know, that's one thing, but if you start getting into somebody that wants percentages on every grant that they get, because they want to make a living at it, it gets real expensive to be a little bit great.
So I guess the thing would be what is reasonable? And I don't know that, right? From a percentage, how to do things. Would you be able to give us some options so that
Well,
we're
certainly, I
better?
mean, but on the other hand, I mean, staff do watch for grants. I mean,
Yeah.
I do write grants. I've
Yes, you do.
probably written tens of millions of dollars of grants in the last 20 years that I've
Yeah.
been successful on. The challenge with it is I'm not chasing grants for the sake of chasing money. When I look for money because we have strategically said that's money we need.
Right.
So I'm not gonna go and say we're gonna build a new community center if it's not in our plan to build a new community center because I now have a new asset
Right.
that I need to maintain. But when it comes to maintaining our existing assets, I am always looking for grants for those types of things.
Maintaining or improving.
Maintaining or improving, yes.
Well, I guess that would be the thing, it's like, our strategic plan is, and if it was related to something that we had put down, that would obviously be the way to go, whether or not it was through you or a individual, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the way we would target any of our grants, and that's the way I always try to do them. I mean, years ago, they had all kinds of funds, Build Canada and all these other wonderful funds they
Right.
brought out years ago. And I know a lot of times we chased the funding and we moved priorities to base on funding, but then there were priorities that actually fell by the wayside because we were busy chasing where the government was prioritizing their money.
Okay, that being said, so what direction do we take here?
I would hope. Well, I don't know, but you know, like, I know, Brian, you reached out to see if there was anybody in the Bancroft area that used to do that grant writing for us, right? And I mean, in a perfect world, or in a world when we have no money, to put towards it, it would be nice to say, you know, if you go ahead and write, you know, 20 grants, thank you very much, but you'll only get a percentage if you're successful. Would be probably not, it wouldn't be a business sense for somebody to do that. Right, so what's reasonable? Right, so what would be reasonable? I don't know what's reasonable out there.
And there might be a reasonable set amount that if someone's gonna write it
Right,
and take that headache away, what's reasonable, because there's a time and effort and everybody's time is worth something.
right.
Whether that's my time, your time, or somebody else's time, there's a cost to people
Yeah.
setting aside their own work to be able to do that, right?
It does present some communication problems when you have an outside agency doing it, because if you haven't budgeted for a project and an opportunity comes up to receive a grant for it, the first question is, how much is the grant, like what percentage? Some of them, most of them are like 50% now. So you still,
There are some in Northern Ontario that are still 90, but you're right, there's a lot of grants, we've gotta have the money in our own pocket.
that's
So if you're
right.
chasing something that's not in the budget, or you're chasing something that's not in the plan, then you're chasing something that you don't already have money set aside for and you need to tax for.
In the case of paving the Allen Lake Road, I think we applied for that grant like 4 times, I think it was, before we finally got it.
It's at least 4 times.
Yeah. The recreation hall in Madawaska was built under an infrastructure grant. And we were able to piggyback from a couple different agencies, and we got money from Rural and Northern Development, we got money from Fed North. And we were able to piggyback one on top of the other. We ended up only had to come up with 10% on our own.
Which was what at the time?
I think it was 1.5 million total, so we had to come up with 150,000. And 75 or 78,000 of that was donated by the Recreation Committee. I was just saying Recreation Committee.
So that was a win-win.
So the township, I think it actually cost about $75,000. Plus the wages for the inspector, because we didn't have, our building inspector wasn't licensed to inspect a building of that size. So we had to hire one from Bangor. But he spent 1 day a week or something like that while the project was going on.
So that was a win-win for the township. Absolutely. Just in my eyes, I think something's better than nothing. And if there's something that we can use, if it's getting back to our, my God, I'm blank. I lost my words. Here in Whitney, at the community center here in Whitney, right, which needs a kitchen upgrade. There's gotta be something out there that we can apply for to help get that kitchen upgrade. Fire Chief Ian Collins was mentioning the other day about having somebody come and paint the doors. That's a big chunk of money to paint the doors on our fire hall. So there's gotta be something out there to help.
It's finding the grant that allows that scope
Yeah,
of work
yeah.
is the.
That's the whole thing, right? You can spend a lot of time, the grants, I can tell you verily, there are still some areas that the government's got grants readily available for. But the grants have really, grant money and grant programs have considerably died up post-COVID. There was a shut off of the taps right about the time COVID ended. So there hasn't been a lot of infrastructure grants. Yes, there's still some accessibility money that comes out. There's still Trillium, the Ontario Trillium Foundation still comes out with some money. Northern Ontario still has some money available through some of their programs. And I've actually had a meeting as recently as last week with our FedNor representative up there. So there are a few areas where there is small pockets of money, but the pockets that are there are smaller and there's fewer of them. So if council wants, I mean, I certainly could put out an ad on our Facebook page or something asking if anyone would be interested in grants, writing grants to submit a proposal to us. And then we could evaluate 2 or 3 proposals that come in and decide if we liked any of them.
I think that would be the way to
That
go.
would be.
Cause that way we'd be a little bit more educated in what we're getting into.
Cause maybe there's somebody locally that's not got much to do and they just want something to do, and maybe that's how they'll contribute to their community. I don't know.
So let's put that feeler out there. Done.
Yeah.
Is everybody in accordance with that?
Absolutely, I think that's a good way forward, and we'll see if we get no uptake, then so be it.
And again, I think, Brian, I'll rely on you to try to figure out the wording, because you're right, you don't want them to just continually spend the whole day trying to find out where all these grants are and applying for them, and then expecting us to give them, 200, 300, whatever, or nothing until that grant comes in, or however that's gonna work out. Because, it would have to be linked to what we felt as a council was a priority, whether or not that was kitchen renovation, accessibility, whatever.
It really needs to be focused on current year budgets, because in the reality, as we all know, where our budget situation is
Right.
this year.
Yes,
And we can't afford to do something extra just because we want to increase our level of service.
right.
Yes, and that's, but
15, 20 years ago, it seemed the government went out of their way to make interested parties aware of available grants. Today, it seems to be the other way around. That the people looking for the grant money have to do all the searching.
Some of them, I've got to contact Carmen Gould in Pembroke, who's with the province, and she's much better than we'd had previously at reaching out to let us know. So anytime something hits her desk new, it comes out in an email to everybody within her area, advising them that there's some money. Now, the FedNor money is a little different. I've got to go north for it. But that's fine. I've got a good contact there. I'm regularly in contact with the folks up there. They've directed me to a couple of grants currently that I'm taking a look at the criteria on, to see if they can fit into something that we're already budgeting for this year, because I'd like to take it out of my budget.
Right. And I think that's the connect that has to happen with whoever applies and us, right? Or you, not so much us.
Councillor Kuyak has got something to add to new business.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, it might not even be considered new business, but I'm just wondering now going forward, what does everybody envision happening with the economic development? Because we haven't really talked about that.
We haven't, actually, the whole. I think what we should do is absorb everything that we've discussed and learned today through that. And, at our next meeting, this is when we should have all the discussion about what direction I think we should be heading in. Is that?
That's all right, I just don't want it to go, oh, we had this, now it's just gonna fall off the table.
No, I don't want that either.
I think
Absolutely
that
not.
this is probably maybe one of our more important committees,
Great start.
So, but like I said, I think what we should do is take all the information and discussion that we've had, absorb it all, and then come back at the next meeting, and then we'll have the direction that we're gonna agree on.
Talking of direction, did you get an answer off of the paramedic services yet about how much rent they're prepared to pay?
The conversation I had with them was more, they're more as to whether or not they would be interested in a separate facility. Because the economics of doing what they want to do may not be feasible. And they didn't have any direction on that. They had to go speak with the new CEO before and they haven't followed back up with me yet.
Okay. I mean, completely as an offshoot here, if, for example, with one septic and with one well, we purchased, say, 6 mobile homes, like park model mobile homes, and they could be put on the land that at the back of the school with a central septic over. If 5 of them were sold, one of them could become a township-owned facility that we could get rent and use it as a facility for the likes of paramedics, something like that. I think we need to think big to cater for smaller needs. I'm just, trying to think outside of well, we can't build because the impracticalities of that, but can we buy something in? Can we,
Those tiny homes or those,
tiny home or
Those things
modular
we had.
homes, that sort of thing?
Tiny homes are probably something that may be a favorable way of looking forward. And
Yes,
there's ways to multiplex those.
Yeah.
That they would not require having some issues with MOE and water and sewer constraint issues that we currently have. I'm doing some homework,
right.
but I also know that our role there might be pairing up somebody like that has facility, has land, and matching them up with somebody that has the product and coming up with a way of bringing them together. I don't know that we necessarily, and it'll be a council decision, want to get into the landlord and tenant business.
No,
When we have the district of Nipissing to do that, that's their role or their
It was more-
responsibility.
buy 6, sell 5, leave us with 1, so that we have something that people can rent from us, like the paramedics. That was my
Yeah.
thoughts. If they're not gonna pay the rent or the mortgage for us to buy a property to put them in, which would be my favourable way of dealing with it, but
Yeah, I'm keeping my options open. I've asked them to go and explore what they might be willing to do. The thought of having the on-site base was a very favorable one. So they've got to go back and relook at this, but the property just isn't appropriate, I don't think, for us to do what they want us to do there.
equally, if they then move out in a couple of years, we're left with something that is not even saleable. Nobody would want to live in that sort of addition on the back of a fire hall type
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, in an ideal world, they build a brand new base with accommodation and it would all be up to the standards of today.
I mean, there's
And
a
that
lot
would
of
be the
land,
ideal world.
there's a lot of land for sale just by the Algonquin Lunch Bar on the corner there. It couldn't be any more desirable to put a modular home on there and have that
I think
as a
that
rental.
property's sold.
Oh, it's gone already, has it?
I don't think that property is big enough.
I think it's been
for septic system or a well for that matter.
Yeah, I certainly don't think modular homes are the way to go because I lived in one for 12 years. It was worth about 25% when I moved out than I paid for it. They're like a car, they depreciate.
Yeah.
The land that they're on may appreciate, but the dwelling itself does not.
They charge a fortune for them now, so.
Oh, I can imagine.
the shipping container idea that was presented last year sometime, wasn't it a shipping container?
There's shipping containers. There's also a company called Tiny Homes, Tiny Home Builders. You can Google them. I've had numerous conversations with their owner and they're all wood frame construction and they have ways of modularizing things.
Right.
So that there are a few companies out there that are doing this, and some that are looking for, one in particular that's looking for a base because they're having some challenges getting established anywhere and they're looking for a place to get
It would tick a couple of our boxes, wouldn't it? It would be alternative for seniors and also for young family. You know, we would be ticking several of our boxes if we could provide.
There's a trailer
small
sale
home.
place at Burley Falls and some of the places that they have for sale look like tiny homes.
They do. Yeah.
But they're on a frame, they can be moved. I don't,
But the only.
personally, those things belong in trailer parks as far as I'm concerned and not in the middle of the village.
I mean, there's several places along the St. Lawrence Seaway. I mean, there's one in Morrisburg that is actually, I think there's probably about 12 or 15 of those style of homes within a community. And they're beautiful. The people are out there tending their gardens, they have pride in where they live, and they are beautiful.
If you want to look at such a community, just go to Cumbermere, Pine Cliff.
Same sort of thing, but they're not open all year round, are
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
they? Oh, they are now?
People live there.
Sunny Hills like that too.
All
Yeah.
year round?
All year round.
Okay,
They're owned by the same family, right?
yes, they are.
Yeah, that's my parents
I didn't know that they
Did
were
that.
open all year round, so.
down at Pine Cliff. So when they decided to move back here, that's what they purchased was a park trailer. Model.
Yeah.
And added on just a small little entry and a deck. And I mean, that's what I use for the Airbnb, but they were very comfortable in there. And in fact, it doesn't cost a lot to maintain or to run, you know. They're well insulated because of the park models, and I'm sure this one is probably 20 years old. Maybe not quite, but getting close, at least 15, so.
It isn't the ideal, but it does actually tick some boxes.
Yes. And it's a smaller version, right? So, you know, my parents certainly could manage to do all that.
But we don't want to get into, and we've had this discussion before, we don't want to get into the rental business at all. We want to make it so that they have the opportunity to put a home there.
And that's what Dr. Robinson was saying, like, we're gonna facilitate that, bring the groups together and let them go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So back in the 80s and I guess the early 90s, there was homes popped up, there was homes popped up in Madawaska, there was homes, I'm sure there were homes that popped up here in Whitney as well too. That were government owned or government built homes, and people, they were offered the opportunity to purchase them from the government. Right?
CHMC wasn't there.
Yeah.
So like, well, for instance, close to your place, Joe, right behind my sister's place. Right, with the same, there's one, two, there was 3 homes there.
Oh, and not your sister's place.
Not my
Across
sister's
the road.
place. Yes. Yeah.
3 of them.
So that was all part of that CMHC.
They were all CMHC.
That was back then, but that helped out, that
That was
helped
in
in
the-
communities tremendously, right, back in the day, but they're not doing that anymore. Obviously.
Absolutely.
Well, I
Well,
think
they got out of it.
I think through the Aboriginal group, though, I think they are still offering something from that perspective.
The Aboriginal group bought some of those.
We have
CMHC
6
houses.
here.
6, is there?
Yeah, Ford, Whitney, 2 in Boston.
It's
They're
Ethel.
being used to.
Yes.
Hi, Ethel.
Ethel, speak up, love.
I just, picking up on Councillor Collins's comments and remarks, and I don't mean to defer all this, but the report from the housing study from DSAB is coming down at the end of April. I'm a little, I'm not too interested right now in being a landlord in this township. I think that's a whole different discussion that we have to have. And so I'm just asking council's indulgence to wait until this report comes down. If it's not anything that's going to help South Algonquin, I believe that then it's all systems go to look at whatever we can in terms of housing in South Algonquin. So I'm just asking council's indulgence till the end of April.
Do you honestly believe we're gonna see at the end of April? Because they've been putting it off, haven't they? For a couple of months. It
Yeah,
hasn't
it got delayed.
materialized.
Sorry, it got delayed, and I've been assured, I've certainly voiced our concerns at the council, at the DSAB board meetings. They know where we stand. They know that we're angry. They know that we are feeling that we're not being taken care of. So I've been asked just to, if I could hold tight until the report comes down, and that is coming down at the meeting of DSAB in the end of April.
So I think that is very valid, that we hold off on any thought of that till then. If it materializes then, so yeah.
Thanks a lot. Something will materialize, I assure you.
Thank you. Getting back to, this has been a long meeting. Another partner that offered to come in and speak and help with us is, made me think of it, was right here at the Futures Program. That they have a lot to offer. So to have them come in and have a presentation, they offered to get a presentation together for us. So if everybody is in agreement with that, I will contact these people and see if they.
What was it again?
Community Futures.
Futures, yeah.
Community Development Corporation,
Yes,
very familiar with it.
yes. So they're willing to come and give a presentation, council. So if everybody agrees, I will contact them to get a presentation together for our next possible economic development meeting. Right, which we're gonna make, who decides when that's gonna happen? Is it?
You do.
I do, okay.
You have the power.
I've got the power, thank you, the power of the pen.
As long as crazy.
I was gonna say, I'm not saying that, okay, but do you wanna, you and I speak about that?
Yes.
The best dates, because we've got stuff coming down on our radar.
Absolutely, yeah. We don't want to piggyback stuff, right, and make anything go over 6 hours. Okay, so I will contact you.
The council started at 6:30 and ended at midnight.
At least for daylight.
More than once,
Mhm.
sometimes twice a month.
So I'm kind of, myself personally, I'm feeling like this is productive. I hope everybody kind of feels the same way. It might have had its sleepy moments, but you know, it is what it is. So, could I ask for a mover for adjournment of this meeting? That was quick. Can I get a seconder?
What's everybody coming?
Okay. Lori and Bill.
And it's 12:52, and all in favor?
Oh, I want to stay.
Okay, I'm just gonna go.
Just a second.
I have nothing left to do today. I could stay all day, you know.